Hello everyone, welcome back to Midnight Lullaby. I know many of you are here to drift gently into sleep. Before you close your eyes, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Let me know where in the world you're listening from. Now, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let the story carry you into dreams. My father began telling me the same story every night when I was 7 years old. It started the week after my mother left. Not died, just left, which somehow felt worse because it meant she chose not to be there anymore. I would lie in my narrow bed, watching shadows dance on the ceiling from the streetlight outside my window, and wait for the familiar creak of floorboards that announced his approach. The sound of his footsteps had its own rhythm. 3 long strides down the hallway, a pause at my doorway while he gathered himself. Then the soft whisper of socks on carpet as he crossed to sit in the chair beside my bed. The chair was upholstered in faded blue fabric that smelled like his aftershave and the cigarettes he smoked on the back porch when he thought I wasn't looking. "Ready for your story?" he would ask, though it wasn't really a question. His voice carried a weight that seemed too heavy for bedtime tales, a gravity that made my chest feel tight. Even before he began, the story was always the same. Word for word, pause for pause, inflection for inflection. At first, this consistency comforted me. In a world where mothers could simply vanish between breakfast and dinner, where familiar routines could shatter without warning, my father's unchanging narrative felt like an anchor, something solid to hold on to as sleep pulled me under. Once upon a time, he would begin, settling back in the chair until the springs creaked their acknowledgement. There was a little boy who lived in a house at the end of a very long street. The house had red shutters and a white front door, and the boy's bedroom window faced east. So he could watch the sun rise every morning like a golden egg cracking open against the sky. His voice during these tellings was different from his daytime voice. Softer, more careful, as if the words themselves were fragile things that might break if spoken too harshly. I would close my eyes and let the familiar phrases wash over me, painting pictures in my mind that had grown more detailed with each repetition. The little boy lived alone with his father, who worked very hard to take care of him. Every evening, when the shadows grew long and the streetlights began to flicker on, the father would come upstairs to tell his son a bedtime story. It was always the same story, because some stories are too important to change. Here, my father would pause, and I would hear him shift in the chair, the fabric whispering against itself. Sometimes I would open my eyes just a crack and see him staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not sadness exactly, but something deeper and more complicated. A look that made me want to pretend I was already asleep. In the story within the story, he continued. There was another little boy who also lived alone with his father. This boy had the same bedroom, the same window facing east, the same red shutters and white front door. and every night. His father would tell him the very same bedtime story about a boy who lived alone with his father, who told him the same bedtime story about a boy who lived alone with his father. The first few times I heard this part, it made me dizzy. Stories inside stories inside stories, like mirrors reflecting into infinity. I would imagine all those little boys lying in beds identical to mine, listening to fathers who spoke with voices like echoes of my own father's voice, stretching backward through endless repetition until the original story was lost somewhere in the recursive depths. And in that story, my father's voice would continue, growing slightly quieter. There was yet another boy and another father telling the same story again. Each story nested inside the one before it, like Russian dolls made of words instead of wood. Each boy listening to the same tale, each father speaking the same words, all of them connected by this single, unbreakable thread of narrative. As months passed, I began to notice things about the story that hadn't been there before. Or perhaps they had always been there, and I was only now old enough to understand them. The way my father's breathing would change during certain passages. The way his foot would tap silently against the floor during specific descriptions. The way his voice would catch, almost imperceptibly, when he reached certain phrases. But there was something the boy in the innermost story knew that none of the other boys knew. My father would say, and here his voice would drop to barely above a whisper. He knew that stories have to end somewhere, that even infinite repetition eventually reaches a final telling, a last listener, a moment when the words stop echoing and settle into silence. I began to dread this part of the story, though I couldn't have explained why. Something about the idea of endings, of final tellings, made my skin feel cold despite the warmth of my blankets. I would burrow deeper into my covers, pulling them up to my chin, trying to create a barrier between myself and whatever was coming next. The boy in the innermost story knew something else, too. My father continued, his words falling into the dark room like stones into still water. He knew that his father told the story not just to help him sleep, but to keep something else awake. Something that lived in the spaces between the words, in the pauses between sentences, in the silence that followed the story's end. By the time I turned 8, I had memorized every word. I could recite the story alongside my father, though I never did. Instead, I would lie there and anticipate each phrase, each pause, each subtle shift in tone. The story had become a part of me, written into my DNA alongside eye color and blood type. But memorization brought awareness, and awareness brought questions I didn't want to ask. The thing that lived in the story. My father would say, his chair creaking as he leaned forward, was patient. It had been waiting for such a long time, moving from telling to telling, from father to son to father again, searching for the right moment, the perfect listener, the ideal ending to its long journey. I began to notice that my father, never looked at me during this part of the story. His eyes would focus somewhere beyond my bed, as if he were seeing something in the corner of the room that I couldn't perceive. His hands would grip the arms of his chair more tightly, knuckles white in the dim light filtering through my curtains. Every night, the thing grew stronger, he continued. Fed by the repetition, nourished by the ritual of telling and retelling. It learned to move between the layers of story, slipping from one nested tale to another, like a spider moving between webs. And, as it moved, it searched for a way out of the endless loop of narrative, a door from story into reality. The room felt colder during these tellings. Not just cool, but genuinely cold, as if something were drawing heat from the air itself. I would pull my blankets tighter and try to convince myself it was just winter. Seeping through the old windows, just the furnace cycling off for the night. But deep down, I knew better. The boy in the innermost story could feel the thing moving closer. My father said, his voice now barely audible. Night after night, telling after telling, it crept through the layers of narrative like ice forming on a window pane. Slow but inexorable, beautiful in its terrible patience. On my 9th birthday, I asked my father why he always told me the same story. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the remains of a modest birthday dinner spread between us. Cake from a box mix. Candles that had been reused so many times their numbers were illegible. He looked at me across the table with those eyes that seemed older than they should be, considering my question with an intensity that made me immediately regret asking. Some stories choose their tellers, he said, finally. And some stories have to be told exactly right, or terrible things happen. That night, the story felt different. Not in its words. Those remained unchanged, immutable as scripture. But in its weight, its presence, its effect on the very air of my bedroom. As my father spoke, I became aware of subtle sounds I had never noticed before. The whisper of something moving in the walls, the soft scrape of what might have been fingernails against wood, the barely perceptible sound of breathing that didn't match the rhythm of my father's chest. The thing had been waiting so long, my father said, his voice taking on a quality I had never heard before. Not fear exactly, but a kind of resigned anticipation. Waiting for the right story, the right teller, the right listener. Waiting for all the pieces to align so it could finally step out of narrative and into flesh. I wanted to interrupt, to ask him to stop, to tell him I was too old for bedtime stories anyway. But something kept me silent. Some instinct that warned against breaking the flow of words. As if interrupting now might cause something far worse than merely hearing the story to its end. The boy in the innermost story knew his father was tired. The telling continued. Tired of carrying the weight of endless repetition. Tired of feeding the thing that lived between the words. Tired of watching it grow stronger with each nightly ritual. But the story had to be told. Had to be completed. Because incomplete stories are the most dangerous kind. They leave doors open, pathways unfinished. Spaces where things can slip through from one reality to another. My father paused here longer than usual, and in that silence, I heard it clearly footsteps in the hallway outside my room. Slow, deliberate steps that seemed too heavy for the old floorboards to support. But my father was sitting right beside me, hadn't moved from his chair. The footsteps belonged to someone else, or something else. And so the story reached its end, as all stories must. My father whispered, his eyes finally meeting mine in the darkness. There was something in his gaze I had never seen before. Not love exactly, though that was there too. Something more like apology. The boy listened to the final words, just as his father had listened, and his father's father before him. The story completed its cycle, the ritual reached its conclusion, and the thing that had waited so patiently between the words finally found its way into the world. The footsteps stopped directly outside my door. The boy grew up. My father continued, his voice now strange and distant, as if coming from very far away. He moved away, got married, had children of his own. And when his own son reached the age of 7, he began to tell him a bedtime story. The same story. The only story that mattered. Because the thing had to keep moving, keep seeking, keep finding new homes in new narratives told by new voices to new listeners. A soft knock echoed through my bedroom. Not on my door, but from inside the walls themselves, as if someone were knocking from within the house's skeleton of wood and plaster. And the story ends the same way every time. My father said, standing up from his chair with movements that seemed suddenly stiff and unnatural, with the same words, the same warning, the same terrible truth that every boy must learn when he becomes old enough to understand. He moved toward my bedroom door, his footsteps perfectly synchronized with the sounds I was hearing in the hallway. But that was impossible, because he was walking away from the door, not toward it. And the sounds were coming from the wrong direction entirely. The story ends, he said, his hand reaching for the doorknob, with these words, "He is standing outside your door." The door opened. My father walked out of my room, his familiar silhouette disappearing into the dark hallway. But the footsteps in the corridor didn't follow him. They remained stationary, positioned directly outside my room, as if someone else entirely were standing there in the darkness. I lay in my bed, covers pulled up to my chin, listening to the sound of breathing that wasn't my father's, wasn't mine, wasn't quite human at all. The thing from the story, the patient presence that had waited so long between words, had finally found its way out of narrative and into reality. And I understood, with the terrible clarity that comes only in moments of absolute truth, that someday I would have a son of my own, that when he turned 7, I would begin telling him a bedtime story. The same story. The only story that mattered. Because some stories choose their tellers, and some stories have to be told exactly right, or even more terrible things happen. Outside my door, the breathing continued, patient, eternal, waiting for the next chapter to begin. Years have passed since that night. I've grown up, moved away, started a family of my own. My son will turn 7 next month, and I've already chosen the chair I'll place beside his bed. Already practiced the opening words in my mind. Once upon a time, there was a little boy who lived in a house at the end of a very long street. The story must continue. The cycle must complete itself. And somewhere in the nested tales yet to be told, something patient and hungry continues to wait, moving between words like a spider between webs, searching for the perfect moment to step from story into flesh. Every night, as I prepare for sleep in my adult bedroom, in my adult house, I can hear it. The soft sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my door. The gentle whisper of something that has followed me across years and miles. When waiting for its next opportunity to feed on the ritual of repetition, to grow stronger through the act of telling and retelling. He is standing outside your door. And soon, very soon, I will teach my son to listen for his footsteps too. Story 2. The tattoo has been fading for 6 days now, and I can't remember when I got it. I noticed it first on a Tuesday morning, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, with my toothbrush in my hand, foam gathering at the corners of my mouth. The black lines that had been sharp and dark, just the day before seemed softer somehow, less definite, as if someone had taken an eraser to the edges while I slept. It's on my left forearm, about 6 inches below my elbow. A compass rose, intricate and detailed, with flowing script underneath that I can no longer quite make out. The letters seem to shift when I'm not looking directly at them, rearranging themselves into words that feel familiar but wrong, like hearing your name called in a voice you almost recognize. I should remember getting it. Tattoos are not small decisions, not casual afternoon choices. They require planning, research, pain tolerance, and money. They require sitting still for hours while someone uses needles to write permanent stories on your skin. But when I try to recall the tattoo parlor, the artist, the moment of decision, there's nothing there but a smooth, impenetrable surface, like trying to remember a dream after the alarm has shocked you awake. The fading continues each day, subtle but undeniable. By Wednesday, the compass points had lost their crisp edges, blurring into suggestion rather than statement. By Thursday, the script beneath was almost completely illegible, reduced to faint marks that could have been shadows, could have been bruises, could have been nothing at all. I call in sick to work and spend Friday researching tattoo removal, trying to understand if this is normal, if ink sometimes simply dissolves on its own. But every article, every forum post, every expert opinion confirms what I already know in my bones. Tattoos don't fade like this. They might blur over decades. Colors might shift and dull, but they don't simply evaporate day by day like water from a shallow pool. The body is rejecting the ink. I tell my reflection, speaking the words aloud to test how they sound in the empty apartment. but that's not quite right either. This doesn't feel like rejection, like an immune response fighting off foreign material. This feels like something deeper, more intentional. Like my body is trying to forget something my mind has already lost. The weekend brings no relief. I photograph the tattoo every morning and evening, creating a time-lapse record of its dissolution. In the photos, the process looks even more dramatic, more unnatural. The ink doesn't fade uniformly, but seems to retreat toward the center, pulling back like tide going out, leaving pale skin in its wake that looks somehow newer than the rest of my arm, as if it has never been exposed to sun or air. By Sunday, only a faint outline remains, like the afterimage of a bright light against closed eyelids. I can trace the shape with my finger, feeling slightly raised skin where the needle marks must have been. But visually, it's almost gone. Another day or two, and there will be nothing left but smooth, unmarked flesh and a growing sense of something important slipping away. I try to remember why I might have wanted a compass rose. Navigation, direction, finding my way, these seem like reasonable metaphors for someone's skin. But when I think about significant journeys in my life, moments when I needed guidance or felt lost, the memories feel flat and rehearsed, like stories I've been told about myself, rather than experiences I've lived. Monday morning, I call my sister. Claire, I say when she picks up, her voice thick with sleep despite the early hour. Do you remember me getting a tattoo? The silence on the other end is long enough that I wonder if the call has dropped. Then, what tattoo? On my arm, a compass rose. You were with me when I got it, weren't you? You drove me home because I couldn't grip the steering wheel properly. Another pause. Jamie, I've never known you to have a tattoo. You always said you were too indecisive to commit to permanent body art. Are you feeling okay? You sound strange. But I can almost remember her sitting in the waiting room, scrolling through her phone while the artist worked on my arm. I can almost remember the sound of the needle, the sharp, buzzing pain that felt like being written upon by lightning. I can almost remember her helping me apply ointment that first night, telling me it looked beautiful, meaningful, perfect. Almost? Never mind, I tell her. I think I was dreaming about it. You know how real dreams can feel sometimes. After we hang up, I sit in the growing morning light and study the faint marks on my arm. If I squint, I can still make out the basic shape. But it's like looking at stars on the edge of vision the moment I try to focus directly on them. They disappear. I go to work. But concentration is impossible. I find myself rolling up my sleeve throughout the day, checking and rechecking the barely visible remnants of ink. My coworkers notice, asking if I hurt my arm, if I need first aid, if I want to talk about whatever is clearly bothering me. But how do you explain that you're mourning the loss of something you can't remember having? That evening, I visit the tattoo parlor closest to my apartment. It's called Permanent Marks. And something about the name tugs at a memory that won't quite surface. The walls are covered with flash art, butterflies and skulls, and tribal designs and quotes in flowing script. Everything looks familiar and foreign at the same time. "Can I help you?" the woman behind the counter asks. She's heavily tattooed herself. Sleeves of interlocking designs that flow from her shoulders to her wrists like illustrated sleeves of skin. "I had a tattoo that's fading," I say, feeling foolish even as the words leave my mouth. "I was wondering if you might have records of who did the work." She looks at me with the practiced patience of someone who has heard every possible tattoo-related question. Tattoos don't fade like that, unless there's something seriously wrong with the ink or the application. "What did it look like? When did you get it done?" I describe the compass rose, the script beneath it. But as I speak, I realize I'm describing something I can barely see anymore. Something that exists more in my sense of loss than in actual visual memory. She listens politely, then shakes her head. "I don't recognize the description, and I've been here for 8 years. We keep records going back 12 years, but I'd need a name or approximate date to search. Do you remember which artist did it?" I don't. I can't remember anything about getting it done. Despite the fact that it must have happened recently enough for the healing process to be complete, but the ink to still be fresh. The timeline makes no sense, like trying to solve a math problem where all the numbers have been replaced with variables. "Could I look through your books?" I ask. Maybe seeing the designs would help me remember. She agrees, pulling out several large binders filled with photos of completed work. I flip through page after page of skin transformed into canvas, stories written in ink and needle. But nothing looks familiar. Nothing triggers the flash of recognition I'm hoping for. As I'm leaving, the woman calls after me. "Hey, if you figure out what's going on with your tattoo, come back and let me know, okay?" I've never heard of anything like that before. It sounds unusual. The word follows me home like a stray cat, refusing to be ignored or forgotten. That night, I dream of needles and pain, and someone holding my hand while I gripped their fingers so tightly I left marks. I dream of choosing the design from a book of possibilities, pointing to the compass rose and saying, This one means something." I dream of ink flowing into my skin like dark water finding its proper channel, and the relief of finally marking myself with something true. I wake up with tears on my cheeks and the absolute certainty that the dream was a memory. But when I look at my arm in the gray morning light, there is nothing there but smooth, unmarked skin. No raised lines, no faint discoloration, no trace that a tattoo ever existed at all. The absence is more unsettling than the fading had been. At least while it was disappearing, there was something to observe, something to document and question. Now there is only emptiness and the growing conviction that something important has been taken from me without my consent or understanding. I call in sick again and spend the day researching memory loss, dissociative disorders. anything that might explain why. I have such vivid recollections of something that apparently never happened. But the medical websites offer no comfort, only lists of symptoms that don't quite match my experience and warnings to seek professional help that I'm not ready to pursue. Instead, I find myself drawn to stranger corners of the internet, forums devoted to unexplained phenomena, e-personal accounts of reality shifting in small but significant ways. I read stories of people who remember different versions of their lives, who wake up to find that details of their history have been altered overnight, who lose pieces of themselves so gradually they don't notice until the absence becomes unbearable. One post, buried deep in a thread about personal timeline anomalies, makes me stop scrolling. Has anyone else experienced losing tattoos? Not removal, not fading, but complete disappearance, along with all memory of getting them. I swear I had a small butterfly on my ankle for 3 years, but last week I looked down and it was gone. No one else remembers me having it. It's like it was erased from reality itself. The responses are mixed, some dismissive, some supportive, some offering similar experiences. But one comment stands out, posted by someone with the username Deepink. Remembers, tattoos are more than decoration. They're anchors, keeping certain versions of ourselves tied to our bodies. When we let go of who we used to be, sometimes the ink lets go too. The question is, what part of yourself are you trying to forget? I stare at the words until they blur together, feeling like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff I can't see the bottom of. What part of myself am I trying to forget? Or more accurately, what part of myself is my body trying to help me forget? That evening, I sit in my living room with my laptop open, typing out everything I can remember about the tattoo, about the dreams, about the growing sense that I am somehow less than I was a week ago. The writing feels important, necessary, like I'm creating a record of something that might otherwise disappear entirely. As I type, fragments of memory surface like bubbles in dark water. The compass rose wasn't just decorative, it was commemorative. I got it after something significant. A journey, maybe, or a decision, or a person who taught me something about finding direction when everything else was uncertain. The script beneath it wasn't random text, but coordinates. Latitude and longitude marking a specific place, a location that held meaning I can no longer access. I can almost see the numbers, almost remember writing them down on a scrap of paper and carrying it to the tattoo parlor like a sacred text. But what place? And why did it matter enough to write on my body forever? The answer comes not in words, but in sensation, the memory of standing somewhere high and open, wind in my hair, looking out at a view that made me understand something fundamental about my place in the world. The memory of feeling found, centered, complete. The memory of wanting to carry that feeling with me always, written in ink that would outlast everything else about this temporary body. And then, like thunder following lightning, the memory of why I needed to let it go. Not the place itself, But what happened there? Not the compass rose, but what it pointed toward. Not the coordinates, but who shared them with me, who stood beside me at that high, open place and helped me understand what it meant to be found. Someone I loved, someone I lost, someone whose absence became too heavy to carry, even written in permanent ink. My body knew before my mind did, knew that some anchors become weights, that some memories become wounds that won't heal as long as they're marked on the skin like territorial claims. So it began the process of forgetting, one layer of ink at a time, until the compass rose dissolved, and the coordinates faded, and the story they told became just another dream half, remembered in morning light. I close the laptop and look at my unmarked arm, running my fingers over skin that feels simultaneously familiar and foreign. The absence still hurts, but it's a different kind of pain now, cleaner, more purposeful. The pain of letting go rather than the pain of losing without understanding why. Tomorrow, I know, I will remember even less. The dreams will fade. The certainty will dissolve. And I will become someone who never had a compass rose tattoo, who never stood at a high place with someone I loved, who never felt the need to mark important moments on my skin like a map of everywhere I've been. But tonight, I remember. Tonight, I understand that some forgetting is not loss but mercy, not erasure but evolution. Tonight, I say goodbye to the ink and the memory and the person I was, when I thought I needed permanent reminders to know who I am. The skin on my arm is smooth and clean and ready for whatever comes next. And for the first time in days, that feels like enough. In the morning, I wake up refreshed, stretching in the early sunlight that filters through my bedroom windows. My arm feels light, unburdened, like I've been carrying something heavy without realizing it, and finally set it down. There's a small, perfectly round mark on my left forearm that I don't remember having before, not a tattoo, just a tiny scar, pale and smooth. When I touch it, I feel nothing but healthy skin, but something deep in my mind whispers coordinates I can't quite hear, points to a compass I can't quite see. It's enough. It's exactly enough. I get dressed and make coffee and start my day as someone who has never been tattooed, who has never needed permanent marks to remember who I am or where I've been. The scar is invisible unless you know where to look. And even then, it might be nothing more than an old scrape, a childhood accident, a place where I once pressed too hard against something sharp. But sometimes, when the light is just right, I swear I can see the faintest trace of a compass rose beneath the surface, waiting patiently for the day I'm ready to remember which direction it points. Story 3. I've always been drawn to the deep woods, where the canopy grows so thick the afternoon feels like twilight. The hiking trail I discovered last month winds through old growth forest, where moss carpets everything in velvet green and the air tastes of earth and decay. It's peaceful here, away from the constant hum of civilization that follows me everywhere else. Today, like every day this week, I find myself walking deeper than I intended. My footsteps make soft impressions in the loamy soil. A gentle thud-thud. Thud that seems to echo longer than it should. The familiar sounds of the forest surround me. The distant tapping of a woodpecker. The rustle of leaves as some small creature scurries through the undergrowth. The whisper of wind through pine needles high above. But as I round a bend in the trail, something catches my eye. There, in a small clearing perhaps 20 feet across, stands the most perfect fairy ring I've ever seen. The mushrooms are pristine white, each one identical in height and spacing, forming a circle so precise it looks drawn with a compass. They seem to glow faintly in the dappled forest light, their caps smooth as porcelain. I approach slowly, my hiking boots crunching on fallen twigs. The air grows cooler as I near the circle, and I notice the forest sounds becoming muffled, as if someone has placed cotton in my ears. The woodpecker's tapping fades to a distant memory. Even my own footsteps sound different now, softer somehow, like walking on thick carpet. The mushrooms are beautiful up close. Each one stands about 6 inches tall, perfectly white, except for the faintest hint of silver along the edges of their caps. They pulse gently, so subtly I'm not sure if I'm imagining it. The space inside the circle is empty except for a patch of dark, rich earth that looks almost black against the lighter soil around it. Something compels me to step inside. The moment my foot crosses the threshold, silence falls like a heavy blanket. Not the gentle quiet of a peaceful forest, but absolute, complete silence. The kind that makes your ears ring and your heartbeat sound like thunder in your chest. I can hear my breathing now, each inhale and exhale amplified in the sudden vacuum of sound. I turn around, expecting to see the forest path behind me, but something's wrong. The trees look different now, taller, more twisted, their bark darker and scarred. The light has changed too, becoming gray and diffuse, as if filtered through fog that isn't there. When I look up, I can't see the sky through the canopy anymore, just an endless tangle of branches that seem to stretch into infinity. My watch shows 3:47 p.m., the same time it showed when I first noticed the fairy ring. I tap the face, thinking it stopped, but the second hand moves in its regular rhythm. Tick. Each sound is unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. I decide to leave, but when I turn toward what should be the edge of the circle, the mushrooms seem farther away than before. Not by much, just enough to make me question my perception. The perfect white caps still pulse with that gentle, hypnotic rhythm, but now I notice they're all facing inward, toward me, like an audience of silent observers. My footsteps make no sound as I walk toward the edge. Even when I deliberately stamp my feet, there's nothing, no crunch of leaves, no impact on earth, just the movement of walking without any auditory confirmation that I'm actually moving at all. It's like walking in a dream where your legs work, but you never seem to get anywhere. When I reach what should be the mushroom line, I extend my hand to touch one of the pristine caps. My fingers pass through it, as if it were made of mist, yet I can feel a cool, tingling sensation where contact should have occurred. The mushroom remains perfectly solid to my eyes, its surface smooth and inviting, but my hand encounters only empty air with a texture like silk. I try stepping through what appears to be the edge of the circle, but my foot meets an invisible barrier. It's not hard like a wall, but resistant, like pushing through thick honey. The sensation travels up my leg, a warm, creeping feeling that makes my skin tingle. I push harder, and for a moment, I think I might break through. But then, I'm gently pushed back to the center of the circle. The dark earth beneath my feet feels different now. Soft and spongy, it gives way under my weight like walking on a thick mattress. Each step makes a subtle squelching sound, the first sound I've heard besides my own breathing and heartbeat since entering the ring. It's oddly comforting, this small return of audio feedback, though the sound seems to come from far away, as if traveling through water to reach my ears. I sit down in the center of the circle, the damp earth cool against my legs through my jeans. From this position, the mushrooms tower above me like pale sentinels. Their gentle pulsing has synchronized now, all breathing in unison with a rhythm slightly slower than my heartbeat. It's mesmerizing, hypnotic in a way that makes my eyelids heavy. Time becomes elastic here. My watch still reads 3:47, but I feel like I've been sitting for hours, or perhaps only minutes. The light hasn't changed, remaining that same gray. Directionless illumination that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Sometimes I think I see movement in my peripheral vision, a flutter of leaves, the dart of a small animal. But when I turn to look directly, there's nothing but those twisted, dark trees stretching endlessly upward. The silence has weight now. I can feel it pressing down on my shoulders, settling into my lungs with each breath. It's not uncomfortable, exactly, but it changes me. My thoughts become clearer, more focused, as if the absence of external sound has allowed my mind to hear itself more clearly. I start to understand things I never understood before. The pattern of shadows on the ground spells out words in a language I don't recognize, but somehow comprehend. The rhythm of the mushrooms pulsing matches something deep in my memory, a lullaby perhaps, or the sound of my mother's heartbeat when I was very small. I realize I'm not alone in the circle. There are others here, sitting just like I am, but when I look directly at them, they're not there. Only in the corner of my vision can I see them, figures made of shadow and suggestion, all facing inward toward the center where I sit. They don't move or speak, but I can feel their attention like warm breath on my skin. One of them looks familiar. The shape of the shoulders, the way the head tilts slightly to one side. It reminds me of someone. But the memory slips away like water through my fingers whenever I try to grasp it. The harder I concentrate, the more the figure fades, until I'm not sure if I saw anything at all. My breathing has slowed to match the pulsing of the mushrooms. In and out, in and out, each breath deeper and more satisfying than the last. The air tastes different now, sweeter, with undertones of flowers and earth, and something else I can't identify. Something that makes me want to breathe deeper, to draw it further into my lungs and hold it there. The barrier around the circle has changed. What once felt like resistance now feels like protection, a warm embrace that keeps the outside world at bay. Why would I want to leave this perfect silence? This place where time has no meaning and thoughts flow like honey. The forest beyond the ring seems harsh now, full of sharp sounds and jarring interruptions. Here, everything is peaceful, harmonious, synchronized. I lie back on the soft, dark earth and look up at the tangle of branches above. They shift and sway in a wind I cannot feel, creating patterns that seem almost like writing against the gray sky. The mushrooms continue their gentle pulsing, and I find my heartbeat adjusting to match their rhythm perfectly. Thump, thump. Pause. Thump. Pause. The shadow figures are clearer now, more defined. I recognize some of them, the mailman from my childhood, my third-grade teacher, the old woman who used to walk her dog past my house every morning. They're all here, all watching with expressions of infinite patience and understanding. They don't speak, but I hear them anyway, their voices blending into a wordless chorus that vibrates through the earth beneath me. Stay, they seem to say. Rest. You've been walking such a long time. Don't you deserve to rest? And they're right. I have been walking for so long, searching for something I could never quite name. But here, in this perfect circle of silence and shadow, I've found what I was looking for. The mushrooms pulse like gentle hearts, the earth cradles me like a lover, and the silence sings lullabies that make everything else seem like noise. My watch still shows 347, but numbers have lost their meaning. There is no time here, only the eternal rhythm of breathing and pulsing and being. The twisted trees above me begin to make sense. They're not twisted at all, but grown in perfect spirals that follow the mathematical harmony underlying all existence. The gray light isn't dim, complete, containing all colors at once in perfect unity. I close my eyes and sink deeper into the soft earth, which seems to rise up around me like a warm bath. The shadow figures lean closer, their presence comforting rather than frightening. They've been waiting for me, I realize. All of them waiting patiently for me to find this place, to cross the threshold and join them in this perfect, silent communion. The mushrooms pulse faster now, or perhaps my heart has slowed. The distinction no longer matters. I am part of the rhythm now, part of the circle, part of the endless, peaceful silence that holds all secrets and asks no questions. When I open my eyes again, though I'm not sure I ever closed them, the forest looks different. The trees are straight and normal. The light is natural sunlight filtering through green leaves. And somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker taps against bark with familiar, comforting persistence. But the silence remains, even as the forest sounds return. They seem muffled and distant, as if coming from another world entirely. And when I look down, I see that the dark earth clings to my clothes and skin, leaving marks like fingerprints that won't brush away. My watch shows 3:47, and the shadow figures are gone, but I can still feel them watching from just beyond the edge of sight, patient as always, waiting for my return, because I will return. The mushrooms still pulse in perfect unison, calling me back to the place where silence has weight and time has no meaning. The fairy ring remains, pristine and patient, a doorway between worlds that stands always open for those who know how to cross the threshold. And I know, with certainty that feels like coming home, that next time I won't be walking back out. Story 4. The leather-bound diary appeared on my nightstand on a Tuesday morning. Nestled between my lamp and the glass of water I always keep there. I noticed it immediately. The way morning light caught the worn edges, casting delicate shadows across its burgundy surface. The leather felt warm under my fingertips, as if someone had been holding it moments before. I don't remember buying it. The thought drifted through my mind like smoke, there and gone. Maybe I'd ordered it online during one of those late night browsing sessions when sleep eluded me. The kind of purchase you make at 2 a.m. and forget by dawn. The pages whispered as I opened it, that soft rustling sound that old paper makes, like dried leaves or distant conversations. But these weren't old pages. They were crisp, almost new, with that faint vanilla scent of fresh binding. Yet the handwriting inside looked familiar, though I couldn't place where I'd seen it before. The first entry was dated 3 days from now. Friday, October 15th. The headaches are getting worse. I found myself standing in the kitchen at 3 a.m. again, holding the carving knife. I don't remember getting up. I don't remember walking downstairs. The blade was cold against my palm, and for a moment, I couldn't remember my own name. I blinked, reading the words again. The handwriting slanted to the right, just like mine does when I'm tired. The loops in the letters, the way the G's curled. It all looked so familiar, yet impossible. My hand trembled as I turned the page. Saturday, October 16th. Mrs. Chen knocked on my door today, she said. She'd been hearing strange sounds from my apartment. Scratching noises in the walls, like something trying to get out or get in. I told her I hadn't heard anything, but that was a lie. I've been hearing them for weeks now. Their loudest just before dawn. The world is that particular shade of gray that makes everything look dead. I found scratches on my arms this morning. 5 parallel lines on my left forearm, like claw marks. They don't hurt, but they're there, raised and pink against my skin. I don't remember scratching myself. I've been cutting my nails short, keeping them filed down to nothing. The room seemed to grow quieter as I read. Even the usual sounds of traffic from the street below faded to nothing. I could hear my heartbeat, steady and loud in my ears, like footsteps on a wooden floor. Sunday, October 17th. I haven't slept in 36 hours. Every time I close my eyes, I see the reflection in my bathroom mirror changing. Not my reflection. Someone else. Someone who looks like me, but isn't me. They mouth words I can't understand, and their eyes are hollow, like looking into a well at midnight. I covered all the mirrors in the apartment with sheets, but I can still feel them watching. Especially the one in the hallway, that antique mirror I inherited from my grandmother. Even under the white sheet, it seems to pulse with a life of its own. My mouth felt dry. I reached for the glass of water on my nightstand, but my hand stopped midway. The water looked different somehow, darker, with tiny particles floating in it like dust motes in sunlight. I left it untouched. Monday, October 18th. The scratching in the walls has moved. It started in the bedroom, then the kitchen, and now it's everywhere. Behind every wall, under every floorboard. Sometimes I put my ear to the wall and listen. The scratching stops when I do that, as if whatever's making it knows I'm listening. Then it starts again, louder, more frantic. I called a pest control company. The man who answered the phone had a strange accent. Not foreign, just old. Like he was speaking a language that was almost English, but not quite. He said they'd send someone Thursday. I hung up before he could ask for my address. I hadn't given him my number. I hadn't given him anything. Thursday. That was today. The realization hit me like cold water. I glanced at my phone. Thursday, October 14th. The entries were dated for tomorrow and beyond. My breathing became shallow, rapid. The diary felt heavier in my hands, as if the words themselves had weight. I flipped through more pages, faster now. The handwriting became more erratic as the dates progressed, slanting wildly across the pages, like someone writing in the dark. Tuesday, October 19th, I found a dead bird on my fire escape this morning. Its neck was twisted at an impossible angle, and its eyes were gone. Just empty sockets that seemed to stare at nothing and everything at once. When I touched it, it was still warm. The neighbors are starting to avoid me. Mrs. Chen crosses the hall quickly when she sees me coming. The mailman leaves packages by my door, but won't ring the bell. Even the cat that usually sits by the building entrance runs when it sees me. Do I look different? I can't tell anymore. The mirrors are still covered, and I'm afraid to uncover them. Wednesday, October 20th. I haven't left the apartment in 4 days. The outside world seems impossibly bright, like looking directly into the sun. The sounds are too loud. Car horns like screaming, footsteps like thunder. Everything hurts to look at, to hear, to touch. I ordered groceries online, but when they arrived, the delivery person left them in the hallway. I heard them running down the stairs after they knocked. Through the peephole, I watched them look back once, their face twisted with something between fear and disgust. What did they see that made them run? My hands were shaking now. The diary slipped slightly in my grip, and I had to adjust my hold. The leather felt different, colder, somehow more alive, like skin that had just lost its warmth. Thursday, October 21st. The voices started today. Not in my head. I know what that feels like. These come from the walls, muffled and distant, like conversations happening in the next room. But there is no next room. My apartment shares walls with Mrs. Chen's place and the Johnsons, but they're never home during the day. The voices whisper my name sometimes, not calling to me, but discussing me like I'm not there to hear them. They know things about me that no one should know. They know about the time I stole money from my mother's purse when I was 7. They know about the accident when I was 16 that I never reported. They know about the dreams I've been having, the ones I've never told anyone about. How do they know? I could feel my pulse in my throat now, quick and fluttering like a trapped bird. The silence in my apartment felt heavy, pregnant with possibility. I strained to listen for whispers, for scratching, for anything that would prove this diary was just elaborate fiction. But deep down, in that place where honest thoughts live, I knew better. Friday, October 22nd. The scratching stopped yesterday. The sudden silence was worse than the noise had been. At least the scratching meant something was there, something real and tangible. Now there's just this waiting, this sense that something is about to happen. I uncovered one mirror today, the small one in the bathroom. For just a moment, for just one terrifying second, the reflection moved independently. It turned its head slightly, as if to get a better look at me, and smiled. Not my smile. Something else's smile wearing my face. I broke the mirror with my fist. 7 years of bad luck. But what's 7 years when you're already living in hell? The fragments scattered across the bathroom floor, like broken stars, each one reflecting a different version of me. In some, I looked older. In others, I looked dead. I turned the page with trembling fingers. The handwriting here was barely legible, as if written in the dark or with an unsteady hand. Saturday, October 23rd, they came today. Not the pest control people. I know now that I never really called them. These were different. They wore uniforms that looked official but wrong, like costumes in a play about authority figures. They had clipboards and serious expressions, and they asked questions about sounds, about disturbances, about my mental state. I let them in because I didn't know what else to do. They walked through my apartment, making notes, whispering to each other in voices too low to understand. One of them lingered by the covered mirrors, running his fingers along the sheets like he could see through them. They left after an hour, but I know they'll be back. One of them left his clipboard behind. Accidentally, he said, but nothing these people do is accidental. The papers on it were blank, except for one line written at the bottom. Recommendation. Immediate intervention required. The next entry was shorter, the handwriting more frantic. Sunday. October 24th, I can't tell what's real anymore. The apartment looks the same, but it feels different. Smaller somehow, like the walls are closing in. The air tastes metallic, like blood or old pennies. My food has no flavor, and water tastes like ash. I found things in my refrigerator that I didn't put there. a jar of something dark and thick that smells like earth after rain. Photographs of people I don't recognize, all of them looking slightly wrong. Too many teeth, eyes that don't quite match, shadows that fall in the wrong direction. I'm losing time. I'll sit down to watch television, and when I look at the clock again, hours have passed. Sometimes I find myself in different rooms with no memory of walking there. This morning I woke up in the bathtub, fully clothed, with dirt under my fingernails. My own fingernails caught my attention. I looked down at my hands, still holding the diary. There was dirt under them. Just a little, like I'd been gardening, but I hadn't been outside in days. The room felt colder now. I pulled my blanket tighter around my shoulders and continued reading. Monday, October 25th. The mirrors are uncovered now. I don't remember uncovering them, but the sheets are folded neatly in the closet, and every reflective surface in the apartment is exposed. I avoid looking at them, but sometimes I catch glimpses in my peripheral vision. The reflections are always slightly delayed, like they're thinking before they mimic my movements. Mrs. Chen left a note under my door. She's moving out, she says. The building has become too strange, too unsettling. She mentioned sounds at night, but not from my apartment. From the walls themselves, like the building is breathing. She asked if I've noticed anything unusual. I want to tell her everything, but who would believe me? I thought about Mrs. Chen. Had she seemed nervous lately? I tried to remember the last time I'd seen her, but the memory was fuzzy, indistinct, like trying to recall a dream after waking. Tuesday, October 26th, I found a door today. It's in my closet, behind the winter coats I rarely wear. It wasn't there before. I'm certain of it. I've lived in this apartment for 3 years, and I know every inch of it. The door is small, painted the same white as the walls, with no handle or lock. It's slightly ajar, just enough to let out the faintest breath of cold air that smells like underground places. I put my ear to the crack and listened. There's something on the other side. Something that breathes but doesn't live. Something that waits. I'm afraid to open it, but I'm more afraid not to. The next few entries were increasingly disjointed, as if the writer, as if I, was losing coherence along with sanity. Wednesday, October 27th, opened the door, tiny room inside like dollhouse furniture. Everything small, perfect, miniature me. Sitting in miniature chair, miniature diary, in miniature hand, writing some words. Right infinite, right in recursion, is an infinite dot me's, infinite doors, infinite room, of us writing, all of us waitings, all of us. We're writing, all of us weighing Thursday. October 28th, can't tell which room is real, which me is real. All mirrors show different versions, some crowing, some laughing, some just staring. They mouth words I can't hear. They know something. Or coming back tonight trying to warn me or welcome me. I could tell which Friday. October 29th, the voices are inside. Now not in walls, in my head. No, that's not right. Either they're coming from somewhere else, somewhere between inside and outside, between real and not. They speak in my voice, say things I never said, but always thought they know. The thoughts I never think out loud. Hello. The reading. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the diary. The words seemed to swim on the page, rearranging themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. I closed my eyes and took deep breaths, trying to calm my racing heart. When I opened them again, I was looking at the final entry. The handwriting was mine, but neater now, more controlled, as if whoever had written it had found a strange peace in the chaos. Saturday, October 30th. Tomorrow is the last day. I know this with the certainty of someone who has already lived it. The men in uniforms will come back, and this time they won't leave. They'll have new papers, new authority, new reasons that sound reasonable to everyone but me. I understand now what this diary is. It's not a prediction of the future. It's a memory of it. I'm remembering forward instead of backward, living in the echo of events that haven't happened yet, but already have. Time isn't a line here, it's a circle, and I'm trapped walking the same path over and over. The thing behind the door in my closet isn't waiting for me to open it. It's waiting for me to realize that I already have. The scratching in the walls isn't something trying to get in or out. It's the sound of all the versions of me in all the parallel moments. All of us scratching at the boundaries between what is and what might be. If you're reading this, if I'm reading this, then it's already too late. The diary will appear on your nightstand on a Tuesday morning, and you'll think it's coincidence or a forgotten purchase. You'll read these words and feel that familiar recognition, that sense of déjà vu. That means you're caught in the loop now too. But here's what I learned, what all the versions of me learned. Don't go outside tomorrow. Whatever they tell you, whatever papers they show you, whatever authority they claim, don't go outside. Stay in your room. Cover the mirrors. Don't answer the door. Don't become another echo in someone else's diary. Don't become me. I turned the page with numb fingers. There was one final line, written in red ink, that looked suspiciously dark. Whatever you do, don't go outside tomorrow. The diary slipped from my hands and fell to the floor with a soft thud. I stared at it, my mind trying to process what I'd just read. It was fiction, obviously. Someone's elaborate prank or a creative writing exercise that had somehow found its way to my apartment. But as I bent to pick it up, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The corner of one page was bent, a small triangular fold that I distinctly remembered making while reading. And there, on my nightstand where the diary had been, was a small indentation in the wood, the kind that forms when something heavy sits in the same spot for weeks or months. I looked at my phone. Thursday, October 14th. Tomorrow was Friday, October 15th. The day the diary said not to go outside. I placed the diary back on the nightstand, my hands steady now, despite the chaos in my mind. Through my window, I could see the street below, people walking their dogs, heading to work, living their normal. Linear lives where time moved in one direction and mirrors showed only what stood in front of them. But here, in this room, with this diary, I could feel the edges of reality growing soft and malleable. I could hear, just at the threshold of perception, the faint sound of scratching in the walls. And somewhere, in a room that might be this room, or might be another room entirely, I could hear the echo of my own voice, reading these very words to myself for the first time, or the 100th time, or the last time. The distinction I was beginning to understand no longer mattered. Outside my window, the sun was setting, painting everything the particular shade of gray that makes the world look dead. In a few hours, it would be Friday. I would not be going outside, not tomorrow, not ever again. Story 5. The first time I noticed it, I blamed myself. Memory lapses, I reasoned. Stress from the new job. The half-empty milk carton that I could have sworn was full just yesterday morning sat there in the refrigerator door, its white surface reflecting the pale fluorescent light. I stood there in my underwear and bare feet. The kitchen tiles cold against my skin, listening to the hum of the appliance and the distant tick of the wall clock. 3:17 in the morning. I'd come down for water. My throat parched and scratchy from the dry air circulating through the old apartment's heating system. The floorboards had creaked under my feet as I padded down the narrow hallway, each step producing a soft groan from the aged wood. But when I opened the refrigerator door, that milk carton stopped me cold. I touched the cardboard surface with my fingertips, feeling its slight dampness from condensation. Half empty, definitely half empty. But I remembered. No, I was certain. I'd bought it fresh yesterday, unopened, sealed. The memory felt solid, real, carved into my mind with the clarity of routine. I closed the refrigerator door and stood there in the darkness, feeling the coolness of the tiles seeping through my feet and up into my bones. The apartment settled around me with its familiar symphony of creaks and sighs, the old building breathing in its sleep. Water dripped somewhere. Probably the bathroom faucet I kept meaning to fix. The sound fell in a steady rhythm, like a metronome keeping time with my heartbeat. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was nothing. People make mistakes. Memory is unreliable. I'd probably drunk some milk and forgotten. Simple as that. But then it was the bread. I counted 7 slices when I bought the loaf on Tuesday. Fresh sourdough from the bakery down the street, the kind with the thick, chewy crust that requires real effort to bite through. I'd counted them because I planned my meals carefully. 7 slices meant breakfast toast for the rest of the week. But on Thursday morning, when I reached into the bag, my fingers found only 4 slices remaining. The bread felt slightly stale at the edges, as if it had been exposed to air longer than it should have been. I lifted each slice, feeling their weight, their texture. 3 slices missing. 3 entire slices of bread that I had no memory of eating. I stood at the kitchen counter, my coffee growing cold in its mug, and tried to reconstruct the past 2 days. Breakfast Tuesday, 1 slice. Breakfast Wednesday, 1 slice. That left 5. I was certain of this calculation. Absolutely certain. but the evidence in my hands told a different story entirely. The apartment felt different that day. Not visually. Everything remained exactly where I'd left it. But there was a quality to the air, a sense of displacement that I couldn't quite name. When I walked through the rooms, my footsteps seemed to echo differently, as if the space had shifted somehow while I wasn't looking. The shadows fell at slightly wrong angles, and the furniture appeared to occupy positions just minutely different from where I remembered placing them. That evening, I began to pay attention. Real attention. I counted everything. 19 crackers in the box, 12 eggs in the carton, half a jar of peanut butter, measured by the level against the label. I took photographs with my phone, timestamp evidence of the exact state of my kitchen. The flash illuminated every corner, capturing the precise arrangement of items on shelves and in cupboards. Then I sat in my living room chair, the worn leather one that had belonged to my grandfather, and listened. The building sounds surrounded me like a cocoon. Mrs. Patterson upstairs running her evening bath, water rushing through pipes in the walls. The couple next door watching television, muffled voices and laugh tracks bleeding through the thin partition. Outside, cars passed on the street below, their engines Dopplering into distance. But underneath it all, I heard something else, or thought I did. A sound so subtle it might have been my imagination, the whisper of footsteps on carpet. Not my footsteps. I was sitting perfectly still. Soft, careful movements that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I held my breath and strained to listen. The sensation was like trying to hear a conversation in another room, words just beyond comprehension. My skin prickled with awareness, every nerve ending alert. But when I focused directly on the sound, it disappeared, leaving only the familiar ambient noise of the building settling into night. Sleep came eventually, though not easily. I drifted off with my bedroom door locked and a chair wedged under the handle. Precaution that felt both necessary and ridiculous. My dreams were filled with the sensation of being watched, of presence just outside the edge of perception. In the morning, the crackers numbered 17, 2 missing. 2 crackers consumed while I slept. The package carefully resealed and returned to its exact position on the shelf. I stared at the box, my hands trembling slightly as I counted and recounted. The remaining crackers looked untouched, their edges intact. But the absence of the missing 2 felt as tangible, as if they were negative space cut from the air itself. I checked my photographs from the night before. 19 crackers, clearly visible through the clear plastic window of the package. But now there were 17, arranged in the same neat rows, as if the missing ones had simply never existed. That's when I started hearing the breathing. It began as a sound so faint, I mistook it for the building's ventilation system. A soft, rhythmic sigh that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of sleep. But as days passed, it grew more distinct, more undeniably organic. Human breathing, slow and steady, always just at the edge of audibility. late at night. When the building had grown quiet and the street outside had emptied of traffic, I would lie in bed and track the sound as it moved through my apartment. It seemed to follow a pattern, a nightly circuit from room to room. Kitchen first. I could hear the soft opening and closing of cabinets, the whisper of the refrigerator door. Then the living room, where furniture would creak minutely under weight that wasn't there. Finally, it would approach my bedroom door. I would lie there, every muscle tensed, listening to that gentle breathing just on the other side of the thin wood barrier. The sound of someone standing patiently, quietly, just waiting. Sometimes I thought I could hear the soft rustle of clothing, the barely perceptible shift of weight from foot to foot. But when morning came, I would find the hallway empty, unmarked, exactly as I'd left it. The food disappearances became routine. Never large quantities. Just enough to notice if you were paying attention. A single slice of cheese from the package, 3 cookies from the jar, half a can of soup, carefully consumed, and the remainder left in the refrigerator, as if partially finished by someone with a modest appetite. I tried leaving notes. Who are you? I wrote on a piece of paper, placing it prominently on the kitchen counter before bed. By morning, the note had been moved. Not discarded, but relocated to a different position on the same counter. Turned 90 degrees clockwise. No response was written, but something about the deliberate repositioning felt like acknowledgement. What do you want? I tried next. This note disappeared entirely, vanishing without a trace, as if it had never existed. I searched every drawer, every cupboard, every possible hiding place, but found nothing. The absence felt almost aggressive in its completeness. The breathing grew stronger, more confident. Sometimes, late at night, I could swear I heard it not just in the hallway outside my bedroom, but inside the room itself. Close to my bed. Close enough that if I reached out my hand, I might touch warm flesh, might feel the rise and fall of a chest expanding and contracting with life. But I never reached out. Some instinct warned me against direct contact, against crossing that invisible boundary between acknowledgement and confrontation. Instead, I lay perfectly still, matching my breathing to the rhythm I heard, synchronizing my heartbeat with the presence that shared my space. Days blended into weeks, and the routine became almost comfortable. I began buying extra food, accounting for my invisible roommate's modest consumption. I left space on the couch when I watched television, as if making room for someone to sit beside me. The apartment felt less lonely, in a way that both comforted and disturbed me. Friends noticed changes. You seem different, Sarah said when she visited for coffee. She sat on the very edge of the couch, her body language suggesting discomfort she couldn't quite articulate. More. Settled, I guess, but also kind of distant. I wanted to tell her about the breathing, about the missing food, about the presence that had become such a part of my daily life. But how do you explain something that exists entirely in the spaces between perception and imagination. How do you describe a roommate who casts no shadow, leaves no fingerprints, but whose existence feels more real than your own reflection in the mirror? Just adjusting to living alone, I said instead, though the words felt like a lie even as I spoke them. That night, as I prepared for bed, I heard a new sound. Not breathing this time, but something more direct, the soft scrape of a chair being moved across the kitchen floor. I froze in the middle of brushing my teeth, toothpaste foam bitter on my tongue, and listened as furniture rearranged itself in the next room. When I crept to the kitchen doorway, flashlight in hand, I found one of my dining chairs, positioned directly in the center of the room, facing the hallway where I stood. The chair sat empty, but somehow expectant, as if someone had just stood up from it upon hearing my approach. I approached slowly, my bare feet silent on the cold tiles. The chair looked ordinary enough. The same wooden chair I'd owned for 3 years, with its familiar scratches and worn upholstery. But positioned there in the center of the kitchen, it seemed transformed into something else entirely. A throne, a witness stand, a place where judgment might be passed or confessions heard. I touched the seat cushion, warm, not just room temperature, but genuinely warm, as if recently occupied by a living body. The fabric held the impression of weight, a subtle depression that suggested someone had been sitting there for quite some time. "I know you're here," I whispered to the empty kitchen. The apartment held its breath. Even the refrigerator's hum seemed to quiet, as if the building itself were listening. I stood there for long minutes, waiting for some response, some acknowledgement of my words, but none came. Only silence and the gradual return of familiar sounds, the tick of the clock, the distant traffic, the building's nocturnal settling. But as I turned to leave, I heard it a single, soft footstep behind me. Not the creak of settling wood or the pop of expanding metal, but the unmistakable sound of weight shifting on floorboards. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but found only the empty kitchen and the chair, now pushed back under the table where it belonged. Sleep became elusive. I would lie in bed, hyper-aware of every sound, every vibration, every shift in the air around me. The breathing continued, sometimes so close I could feel its warmth against my cheek. But now there were other sounds too, the whisper of pages turning, as if someone were reading by lamplight, the soft tap of fingers on wood, like patient drumming, the occasional creak of weight settling into furniture. My invisible roommate was becoming less invisible, in every way except the one that mattered most. One morning, I found something that changed everything. Not something missing this time, but something added. A single hair on my pillow, long, dark, and definitely not mine. I held it up to the light streaming through my bedroom window, examining its texture, its color, its undeniable reality. Human hair, recently shed, carrying the faint scent of shampoo I didn't recognize. The hair felt electric between my fingers, charged with implications I wasn't ready to consider. someone had been in my bed, close enough to my sleeping form to lose a strand of hair on my pillow, close enough to watch me dream, to count my breaths. Oh, to know the exact rhythm of my sleep. I sealed the hair in a plastic bag, though I had no plan for what to do with this evidence. It felt important to preserve it, to maintain some proof of what was happening in my apartment. The bag went into my desk drawer, alongside photographs of missing food and notes documenting strange sounds. A collection of evidence for a case that could never be tried in any court that dealt with conventional reality. That evening, as sunset painted my living room in shades of orange and gold, I made a decision. I would speak directly to my invisible roommate, acknowledge the situation openly, and see what happened next. "I know you're here," I said to my empty apartment, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I don't know who you are or why you're here, but I know you exist. We can't keep pretending otherwise." The apartment absorbed my words without echo or response. But as minutes passed, I became aware of a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The air seemed to thicken, as if charged with anticipation. The familiar sounds of the building, pipes, settling wood, distant voices, faded until I was surrounded by a silence so complete it felt like being underwater. Then, so softly I almost missed it, I heard a response. Not words exactly, but a sound that carried the cadence of speech. A whisper so quiet, it might have been my imagination, but shaped like language, formed like meaning. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding me like fog. I strained to understand, to parse meaning from the barely perceptible sounds. But the harder I listened, the more elusive it became, until I was left wondering if I'd heard anything at all. "Please," I said, my voice cracking with emotion I hadn't expected to feel. "I just want to understand." This time, the response came not as sound, but as sensation. A gentle pressure against my shoulder, like a comforting hand, warm and substantial and undeniably real. I looked down but saw nothing, only empty air where the touch originated. Yet the sensation continued, conveying something that words couldn't express, not threat, but loneliness. Not malice, but desperate, aching need for connection. We stayed like that for what felt like hours. Me sitting in my chair, feeling the weight of an invisible hand on my shoulder, while darkness settled over the apartment like a blanket. Neither of us moved or spoke again. We simply existed together in the same space, acknowledging each other's presence in the only way possible. When I finally went to bed that night, I left my door unlocked. The next morning brought no dramatic revelations, no supernatural manifestations or ghostly appearances. Just the familiar routine of missing food and moved objects. But something fundamental had shifted between us. The presence in my apartment felt less intrusive now, more like a quiet companion than an unwelcome intruder. I began leaving 2 coffee cups on the counter each morning, 2 plates when I ate dinner, 2 books on the coffee table when I read in the evenings. My invisible roommate never used these extra items. The second cup remained empty, the second plate untouched. But their presence seemed to matter somehow, an acknowledgement of shared space and mutual recognition. Weeks passed in this strange equilibrium. We coexisted peacefully, my roommate and I, navigating around each other like partners in an elaborate dance. I grew accustomed to the sound of breathing that wasn't my own, to the sensation of being watched by eyes I couldn't see. The apartment felt complete in a way it never had before, occupied by exactly the right number of souls. But late at night, when the building was at its quietest and the boundary between sleep and waking grew thin, I sometimes wondered about the nature of my invisible companion. Were they living or dead? Real or imagined? A ghost haunting my apartment, or a fragment of my own psyche made manifest through loneliness and need? These questions felt less important as time passed. What mattered was the presence itself, the knowledge that I wasn't truly alone, that someone or something shared my daily existence and found it worthy of attention. In a world that often felt indifferent to individual human experience, my invisible roommate offered the most valuable gift of all, the certainty of being observed, understood, and quietly accepted. And so I continue to live with my invisible roommate, sharing space and silence, food and solitude. They are always there, but never seen, present, but never proven. Real in every way that matters, and imaginary in every way that doesn't. Sometimes, in the moments between waking and sleep, I wonder if I am the invisible one, if somewhere, in a reality just adjacent to my own, someone lies in bed listening to my breathing, counting my footsteps, and wondering about the presence that shares their space, but never quite reveals itself. The thought doesn't disturb me as much as it should. After all, we all need someone to know we exist, even if they can never see us clearly. In the end, perhaps being invisible to each other is just another way of being perfectly, inexplicably, undeniably there. Story 6. The notification chime pierced through the quiet of my apartment at 3:17 a.m. That familiar, too, note melody that meant someone had left me a voicemail. I rolled over in bed, squinting at my phone's glowing screen through eyes sticky with interrupted sleep. Unknown number, but the duration made me sit up. 4 minutes and 38 seconds. Long for a wrong number. Too long for most legitimate calls at this hour. I almost deleted it without listening. Almost. But something about the timestamp bothered me. 3:17 a.m. was precisely the time my grandmother used to wake up every morning during the last months of her life, when pain and medication had scrambled her internal clock and left her wandering the halls of the nursing home, confused and calling for people who had been dead for decades. My finger hesitated over the delete button, then tapped play instead. Static filled my ear, the kind of white noise you get from old recording equipment or poor cellular reception. But underneath the electronic snow, I heard something that made my blood freeze in my veins, the faint, unmistakable sound of my grandmother's voice. Hello. Hello, can you hear me? It's so hard to... The connection is very bad here. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. Grandma Rose had been dead for 6 months. I'd helped carry her coffin, had felt the weight of her absence as we lowered her into the ground on that gray October morning. Yet here was her voice, thin and distant, but undeniably hers. Emerging from my phone speaker, with all the familiar cadences and inflections I'd grown up hearing. I don't know if this is working, her voice continued through layers of static. Everything is so confusing here, so cold. I can't seem to find anyone I recognize, and the lights keep going on and off. The rational part of my mind scrambled for explanations. A recording someone had made before she died. A cruel prank using audio editing software. But the voice had qualities that no recording could capture. The slight wheeze in her breathing from decades of cigarettes. The way she clicked her tongue against her dentures when she was thinking. The particular rhythm of her speech when she was frightened or confused. They told me I could make one call, she said, her words floating through an ocean of electronic noise. Just one call to let someone know where I am. But I can't remember. I can't remember most of the numbers anymore. Yours was the only one that stayed clear in my mind. I pressed the phone harder against my ear, as if physical proximity could somehow bring her closer, could bridge whatever impossible gap separated us. My hands were shaking, making the device tremble against my face. The caller ID still showed. Unknown, but the number looked somehow familiar, though I couldn't place where I might have seen it before. The place where they put me. Her voice continued, growing fainter as static surged and receded like electronic waves. It's not like what I expected. It's not anything like what they told us in Sunday school. There's no bright light, no tunnel, no angels with wings and harps. It's just empty. Cold and dark and empty. With all these corridors that don't lead anywhere and doors that won't open. I fumbled for the bedside lamp, suddenly needing light, needing to anchor myself in the solid reality of my bedroom. The warm yellow glow revealed familiar objects. Books on the nightstand, clothes draped over the chair, the framed photo of Grandma Rose and me from my college graduation. In the picture, she was smiling that proud, gap-toothed smile, her hand resting on my shoulder, with the gentle weight I could still remember feeling. But the voice from my phone continued, and that familiar weight felt more like a chill creeping up my spine. I keep trying to find a way out, she said, her words punctuated by bursts of static that sounded almost like sobbing. But every door I open just leads to another corridor, another set of doors that won't budge. And it's so cold here, honey, so terribly cold. I can see my breath when I speak. Little white puffs that disappear as soon as they form. The detail about visible breath struck me as particularly strange. Her Grandma Rose had lived her entire life in Florida, where breath never fogged and winter meant putting on a light sweater. She used to complain endlessly about air conditioning in restaurants, always asking waiters, to turn down the cold air. For her to mention visible breath meant she was somewhere impossibly frigid, somewhere that violated every understanding of comfort and warmth she'd ever possessed. "I've been walking for such a long time," her voice continued. "Days, maybe weeks. It's hard to tell because there are no windows here, no way to know if it's day or night. Just these fluorescent lights that flicker on and off at random, casting shadows that move when they shouldn't move." I found myself straining to hear beyond her words, listening for background noise that might give some clue about her location. But there was nothing except the electronic hiss and her voice floating through it like a transmission from another planet. No ambient sounds, no echoes that might indicate the size of the space she occupied. No other voices that might suggest she wasn't alone. "The strangest thing," she said, her tone taking on the wondering quality she'd always had when describing something that puzzled her, "is that I'm not alone here, but I might as well be. I can hear other people, voices calling out, footsteps echoing in distant corridors, sometimes what sounds like crying or laughing. But whenever I follow the sounds, trying to find whoever is making them, they stop just before I reach them. As if everyone else is always one step ahead, always just around the next corner." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature in my apartment. I'd always been close to my grandmother, visiting her weekly, even during her final decline, when Alzheimer's had begun stealing her memories piece by piece. But she'd never spoken to me about death, about what she thought might come after. Our conversations had focused on the present, the weather, my job, her complaints about the nursing home food, her confusion about which decade we were living in. "I need you to understand," her voice said, suddenly clearer, as if the static had momentarily parted to let her words through, "that this isn't what anyone prepared me for. All those years of church, all those hymns about eternal rest and heavenly peace, none of it was true. Or maybe it's true for other people, but not for me. Maybe I did something wrong, made some mistake that landed me in this place instead." The guilt in her voice was heartbreaking. Grandma Rose had been the most genuinely good person I'd ever known, volunteering at soup kitchens, well into her 80s, sending birthday cards to every family member without fail, always having fresh recipes ready for any child who knocked on her door. If anyone deserved whatever version of heaven existed, it was her. "I keep thinking about you," she continued, her words growing fainter again. "About all of you, really. But especially you, because you were always so patient with me at the end, when I couldn't remember things properly. You never got frustrated when I asked the same questions over and over, never made me feel stupid when I forgot your name or couldn't recognize your face. I remembered those final visits all too clearly. The way she would look at me with polite confusion, trying to place this young man who claimed to be her grandson. The way she would sometimes call me by my father's name, or her brother's name, or the name of some boy she'd known in elementary school 70 years ago. I'd tried to be patient. But there had been moments of sharp frustration, times when I'd wanted to shake her and demand that she remember me, remember us, remember herself. The worst part, her voice said, now barely audible through increasing static, isn't the cold or the emptiness or the endless corridors. It's the forgetting. Even here, wherever here is, I can feel my memories slipping away. Names I've known for decades, faces I've loved my entire life. Moments that seemed so important when they were happening, all of it fading like ink in water. The static surged, almost drowning out her next words entirely. I pressed the volume button repeatedly, turning it up as high as it would go, desperate not to miss anything she might say. I'm forgetting what your face looks like, came her voice, barely a whisper now. I can remember the sound of your laugh, the way you used to help me with my crossword puzzles. But your face is becoming blurry, like a photograph left in the sun too long. And I'm so afraid that if I forget you completely, I'll lose the only connection I have to who I used to be. Tears were streaming down my cheeks now, hot against my skin in contrast to the chill that seemed to be settling over my entire apartment. I wanted to respond, to tell her I remembered everything about her, to somehow push my memories through the phone and into whatever impossible space she occupied. But this was a voicemail, a one-way transmission from somewhere that shouldn't exist. They're coming for me now, she said, her voice taking on a note of panic I'd never heard from her before. I can hear footsteps in the corridor outside, getting closer. I don't know who they are. I've never seen them clearly, just glimpses of shadows moving at the edges of my vision. But when they come, I have to go with them. I have to walk deeper into this place, further from whatever connection I have to the world I remember. The static was building to a crescendo now, threatening to drown out her words entirely. But through the electronic storm, I could hear something else, the faint echo of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, growing steadily louder. I wanted to tell someone, her words rushing now, as if she were running out of time. I needed someone to know that this is what happens. That death isn't the peaceful sleep they promise you. It's just more confusion, more forgetting, more wandering through places that don't make sense, looking for people you can't find. The footsteps were very close now, accompanied by what sounded like keys jingling, metal against metal in rhythmic percussion. I found myself holding my breath, as if making any sound might somehow draw attention to me across whatever impossible distance separated us. Remember me, she whispered, her voice now so faint I had to strain to hear it. Please remember me the way I was before the sickness, before the forgetting, before I ended up in this cold, dark place. Remember the cookies I made for you. Remember the stories I told about your grandfather. Remember the way I used to hum while I worked in the garden. The static was overwhelming now, but underneath it I could hear her crying, soft, heartbroken sobs that seemed to come from a place of infinite loneliness. And still those footsteps approached, closer and closer, until they seemed to be right outside whatever door she was hiding behind. "I have to go now," she said, her voice barely distinguishable from the electronic noise. "They're here, but I need you to promise me something. Don't try to call this number back. Don't try to find me or follow me or bring me back. This place, it's hungry. It feeds on connections, on love, on the bonds between the living and the whatever I am now. If you try to reach me here, you might end up trapped here too." A new sound joined the symphony of static and footsteps. The slow creak of a door opening, hinges protesting with metallic groans that seemed to echo from vast distances. "I love you," she said, her final words almost lost in the chaos of sound. "I love you, and I'm sorry I can't remember your name anymore. I'm sorry I can't remember anyone's name. I'm sorry for everything I'm going to forget, and everything I've already forgotten." The line went dead. I sat in my bed, staring at my phone screen, watching the voicemail interface return to normal, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. The duration still showed 4 minutes and 38 seconds. The timestamp still read 3:17 a.m. The number was still listed as unknown, though now I was certain I recognized it. It was the number from my grandmother's old rotary phone, the one that had been disconnected when we cleaned out her apartment after she died. My hands trembling, I immediately tried to call the number back. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, then connected to a recording. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service." I tried again. Same result. Again and again. With growing desperation, but always the same mechanical voice informing me that the number didn't exist. But the voicemail remained on my phone, solid and undeniable proof that something impossible had just occurred. I played it again, then again, memorizing every word, every inflection, every pause between her sentences. The voice was definitely hers. Not a recording I'd ever heard, not a synthesis created by technology, but unmistakably my grandmother speaking to me from wherever she had ended up after death. Over the following days, I became obsessed with the message. I listened to it constantly, taking notes on every detail she'd mentioned, trying to construct some map of the place she described. Corridors that led nowhere, doors that wouldn't open, fluorescent lights that flickered randomly, shadows that moved independently of their sources, other voices always just out of reach. I researched everything I could find about near-death experiences, afterlife accounts, paranormal communications. But nothing I read matched what she had described. Most accounts spoke of peace, light, reunion with deceased loved ones. My grandmother had found none of these things, only isolation, cold, and the gradual erosion of everything that had made her who she was. 3 weeks after receiving the voicemail, I got another call at exactly 3:17 a.m. This time I was ready. I answered on the first ring. "Hello," I said into the darkness of my bedroom. Static filled the line, but underneath it I could hear her voice again, fainter now, more distant. "I told you not to try to reach me," she said, her words fractured by electronic interference. "I told you this place was hungry. Now it knows about you. Now it can see the connection between us. Grandma, I'm sorry." I whispered into the phone. "I had to know if you were okay. I had to try to help you." "You can't help me," she replied, her voice carrying infinite sadness. "No one can help me. But by talking to me, by maintaining this connection, you've made yourself visible to the things that run this place. They're interested in you now. They want to know how you can hear me when no one else can." In the background, I could hear those footsteps again, closer than before, accompanied by new sounds. Whispers in voices I didn't recognize, but the scrape of small thing being dragged across a hard floor, the distant echo of someone screaming. "I'm forgetting faster now," she continued. "Every time we talk, every time I remember what it was like to be alive, this place takes more of my memories as punishment. Soon I won't remember anything at all. Not you, not your grandfather, not even my own name. I'll just be another voice lost in these corridors, calling out to no one, walking endlessly through spaces that exist only to contain the forgotten. There has to be something we can do," I said, though even as I spoke the words, I felt the futility of them. "Some way to get you out of there. Some way to bring you home." She repeated, the word carrying weight and longing. I can barely remember what home looked like. Was there a garden? I think there was a garden, with flowers that bloomed in spring. But I can't recall what kind of flowers they were. And there was a kitchen where I cooked something. Meals for people I love. But their faces are becoming shadows. Their names are becoming whispers. The static was building again. But this time it carried new elements. Sounds that might have been voices, or might have been wind through abandoned places, or might have been something altogether more sinister. "They're coming for me again," she said, her voice now barely audible. "But this time they want me to bring something with me. They want me to bring a piece of the living world into this dead place. They want me to bring you." The line crackled with interference that sounded almost like laughter. "Don't answer when I call again," she whispered. "No matter what you hear, no matter how much I beg, or plead, or cry, don't answer. Let the connection die. Let me be forgotten completely. It's the only way to keep you safe from ending up here with me." "I can't do that," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I can't just abandon you there." "You have to," she replied, her voice fading as the static increased. "Because love is what they use to drag the living into this place. Love is the hook they bait their traps with. And if you keep answering, keep listening, keep trying to help me, they'll use that love to pull you down into the cold and the dark and the endless forgetting." The footsteps were very close now, and with them came new sounds. The jingle of keys, the creak of hinges, the whisper of fabric against stone. And underneath it all, barely perceptible but undeniably there, the sound of multiple voices speaking in unison, chanting words I couldn't understand in a language that predated human speech. "Remember the cookies," she said, her final words almost lost in the rising storm of sound. "Remember the garden. Remember the woman I was before this place took everything else away. And when you can't remember me anymore, when my voice becomes just another whisper in your dreams, know that you did the right thing by letting me go." The line went dead again. Since then, the calls have continued. Every few nights, always at 3:17 a.m., my phone rings with that same unknown number. I've changed my number twice, bought a new phone, even moved to a different apartment across town. But the calls always find me, always pierce through the darkness of my sleep with that familiar note chime. And each time, her voice is fainter, more fragmented, carrying less of the woman I remember and more of whatever that cold, dark place is turning her into. She begs me not to answer, warns me about the things that watch our conversations, but describes in increasing detail the price she pays for each moment of connection to the living world. But I can't stop answering. I can't let her disappear completely into that labyrinth of forgetting. Can't abandon her to walk those endless corridors alone. Even knowing that each conversation brings me closer to joining her. In that place of shadows and lost memories, I continue to pick up the phone when it rings. Because love is stronger than fear, stronger than logic, stronger than the instinct for self-preservation. And if that love eventually pulls me down into the cold and the dark, at least I'll be there with her. At least she won't have to face the gradual dissolution of everything. She once was entirely alone. The phone is ringing now. It's 3:17 a.m., and somewhere in a place that shouldn't exist. My grandmother is trying to call me one more time. Her voice will be weaker tonight, her memories more scattered, her warnings more desperate. But I'm going to answer anyway. Because some connections are too strong to break, even when breaking them is the only sane thing to do. "Hello, Grandma. I'm here. I'm still here." Story 7. The monitor crackled to life at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in late October, filling my bedroom with the soft static that had become as familiar as my own breathing. I'd grown accustomed to its gentle white noise, the electronic whisper that assured me all was well in the room down the hall, the room that had been empty for 3 months now. Emma had moved out in July, finally old enough for her own big girl bed, proud and independent at 4 years old. But I'd kept the baby monitor connected, partly from habit and partly from the strange comfort it provided during those long, sleepless nights when the house felt too quiet, too still, too full of the echoes of conversations that no longer happened. The static was soothing, like distant rain or the whisper of wind through leaves. It filled the silence that had settled over the house since David left, since Emma started spending half her time at his apartment across town, since I'd found myself living alone for the first time in almost a decade. But tonight, the static carried something else, At first, I thought it was interference from a neighbor's device. Perhaps someone else's baby monitor, picking up a signal from nearby. The sound was soft, barely audible above the electronic hum, but unmistakably human. A woman's voice. He humming a melody I didn't recognize, but that seemed familiar nonetheless, like a song from a half-remembered dream. The humming was gentle, the kind of sound a mother makes when soothing a restless child. It rose and fell in a simple pattern, wordless but full of meaning, carrying all the tenderness and patience that lullabies are meant to convey. I found myself relaxing as I listened, my breathing slowing to match the rhythm of the unknown melody. But as I became more alert, more focused on what I was hearing, a chill ran down my spine. The baby monitor was connected to Emma's old room, and I had walked through that room just hours earlier while doing my nightly check of the house. It was empty, not just of people, but of the usual signs of life. No furniture except for the small nightstand where the monitor's transmitter sat. No decorations, no toys. Even the closet had been emptied when Emma moved her belongings to her new room down the hall. I sat up in bed, straining to hear more clearly. The humming continued, soft and constant, as if someone were sitting in that empty room, rocking an invisible child, singing them to sleep. The melody was beautiful in its simplicity, but there was something underneath it, a quality I couldn't quite identify, that made my skin prickle with unease. I reached for the monitor's receiver on my nightstand and turned up the volume. The humming became clearer, more distinct, and I could hear the subtle intake and release of breath that marked it as undeniably real. This wasn't interference or cross signals. This was someone in my house, in my daughter's former room, singing a lullaby to empty air. My first instinct was to call the police, but something held me back. The voice wasn't threatening or sinister. It was gentle, loving, filled with the kind of maternal warmth that every child deserves to hear. Whoever was in that room wasn't there to cause harm. They were there to comfort, to soothe, to provide the kind of care that the room had been missing since Emma moved out. But that realization was almost more disturbing than the alternative would have been. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor, and crept toward the door of my bedroom. The humming continued, carried clearly through the monitor, and I found myself moving to its rhythm, my steps light and careful, as if I were trying not to wake a sleeping child. The hallway stretched before me, illuminated by the pale glow of the nightlight. I kept plugged in near Emma's old room. Everything looked normal, unchanged, exactly as it had been when I'd walked this same path before going to bed. But the humming continued, and I could see a faint light coming from under the door of Emma's room. A warm, soft glow that hadn't been there earlier. I pressed my ear to the door and listened. The humming was clearer now, not filtered through the electronic transmission of the monitor. I could hear the subtle variations in tone, the places where the melody repeated or evolved. the gentle breathing that punctuated each phrase. It was definitely a woman's voice, rich and mature, with a kind of practiced ease that spoke of years spent singing children to sleep. But who was she? How had she gotten into my house? And why was she in that particular room, singing to no one? I tried the doorknob, expecting it to be locked, but it turned easily in my hand. The door opened without sound, revealing a scene that made me question everything I thought I knew about reality. The room wasn't empty. It was furnished as a nursery, complete with a rocking chair, a crib with soft white bedding, a changing table, and all the gentle decorations that mark a space prepared for a baby. Soft toys lined the shelves. A mobile hung over the crib with tiny animals that turned slowly in a breeze I couldn't feel, and everything was bathed in the warm glow of a nightlight shaped like a smiling moon. In the rocking chair sat a woman I didn't recognize, but who looked somehow familiar. She was middle-aged, with graying hair pulled back in a simple bun and wearing a nightgown that seemed to belong to another era. White cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. She rocked gently back and forth, her arms positioned as if she were holding a baby. Her face turned down toward the empty space against her chest with an expression of infinite tenderness. She was humming the same lullaby I'd been hearing through the monitor, but seeing her made the melody even more beautiful, more complete. Her whole body swayed with the rhythm, her breathing synchronized with the rise and fall of the tune, her presence so natural and nurturing that, for a moment, I almost believed there really was a baby in her arms. But there wasn't. Her arms cradled nothing but air. Her gentle swaying motion was devoted to an invisible child, and her lullaby was sung to silence. I stood in the doorway, frozen between fascination and fear, watching the strange woman rock her absent baby in my daughter's former room. She hadn't noticed me. Her attention was completely absorbed in her maternal task. Her world contracted to the small circle of care she was providing to someone who wasn't there. "Excuse me," I whispered, not wanting to startle her, but needing to understand what was happening. She didn't respond. She continued rocking, continued humming, her gaze never lifting from the empty space in her arms. It was as if I hadn't spoken, as if I weren't there at all. I stepped into the room, my feet making soft sounds on the carpet that I didn't remember being there. Everything about the space felt different from how it had been just hours before. Warmer, more lived in, filled with a kind of love and attention that transforms a room into a sanctuary. "Hello," I said, louder this time. Still no response. The woman's rocking continued its steady rhythm, her humming uninterrupted. I moved closer, but until I was standing directly beside the rocking chair and reached out to touch her shoulder. My hand passed through her like she was made of morning mist. I jerked back, my heart hammering against my ribs, but the woman remained undisturbed. She was there. I could see her clearly, could hear her breathing, could watch the gentle motion of her rocking. but she had no substance, no physical presence that my hand could connect with. A ghost. The word formed in my mind unbidden, carrying with it all the implications I wasn't ready to accept. A ghost in my house, in my daughter's former room, caring for a baby who existed only in whatever realm she inhabited. But as I watched her, as I listened to her lullaby and observed the infinite patience in her movements, I found that my fear was replaced by something else, a deep, aching sadness. This wasn't a malevolent spirit or a threatening presence. This was a mother, separated by death or time or circumstance from the child she loved, continuing to provide care across whatever boundary divided them. I sank into the chair that appeared beside her. Another piece of nursery furniture that hadn't been there before, and simply watched. The lullaby wrapped around me like a warm blanket, and I found myself remembering the nights I'd spent in this same room when Emma was a baby, rocking her to sleep while humming my own collection of half-remembered songs. The woman's lullaby was different from any I knew, but it carried the same emotional weight, the same promise of safety and love that every mother's song contains. As I listened, I began to understand that she wasn't singing to empty air. She was singing to every child who had ever been rocked to sleep in this room. Every baby who had been loved and cherished and sung to by a mother's voice. She was singing to Emma wherever Emma was now. She was singing to the memory of all the nights I'd spent in this chair, all the lullabies I'd hummed, all the love I'd poured into this space when it was needed. She was singing to the part of me that still needed to be rocked to sleep, the part that missed being someone's first priority, someone's most important responsibility. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed to move differently in that warm, glowing room. The woman never tired, never stopped rocking, never let her lullaby fade. She provided the kind of constant, unconditional care that every child deserves and that too few adults ever receive. As dawn approached, as the first pale light began to filter through the window, the woman's humming grew softer, more distant. The furniture around us began to fade, becoming translucent, then transparent, then gone. But she remained solid and present until the very last moment. Just before she disappeared entirely, she looked up and met my eyes. Her face was kind, understanding, filled with the wisdom of someone who had loved deeply and lost much. She smiled, a gentle expression that conveyed forgiveness and acceptance and hope. Then she was gone, and I was sitting alone in Emma's empty room with the morning light streaming through the bare windows and the baby monitor crackling with nothing but static on the nightstand. But the lullaby continued in my memory, and I realized that some gifts transcend the boundaries between presence and absence, between the living and the dead, between what we can touch and what we can only feel in our hearts. That night, I moved the baby monitor back to my bedroom and turned it on, hoping to hear the mysterious lullaby again. But there was only static, the gentle white noise that had always been there. 3 weeks later, Emma spent the night at my house for the first time since the divorce was finalized. As I was tucking her into her new big girl bed, she looked up at me with those bright, curious eyes that saw everything. "Mommy," she said, "who was the singing lady?" My breath caught. "What singing lady, sweetheart?" "The one in my old room. She sings pretty songs at night. She wanted me to tell you thank you for letting her take care of all the babies." All the babies. Emma nodded seriously. She says, "There have been lots of babies in that room, and she loves them all. She takes care of them when their mommies can't be there. She says you were a very good mommy to me, and now she helps take care of other children who need lullabies." That night, after Emma was asleep, I walked down the hall to her former room. It was empty again. Just walls and floor, and the baby monitor sitting silently on the nightstand. But as I stood there, I thought I could hear, faint and distant, the echo of that beautiful lullaby, the promise that someone, somewhere, was still rocking invisible children to sleep with songs of love and comfort. I never heard the lullaby through the monitor again, but I didn't need to. I carried it with me now. The memory of perfect maternal love that transcends time and space and the ordinary boundaries of existence. And sometimes, when the house feels too quiet or the night too long, I hum it to myself. A lullaby sung by a mother's ghost to all the children who have ever needed the comfort of being sung to sleep. The monitor still sits on Emma's old nightstand, though I've long since stopped expecting to hear anything through it. But sometimes, when Emma is staying at her father's house and the silence grows too heavy, I turn it on anyway, not to hear the mysterious lullaby, but to remember that love is never truly absent. It just changes form, moving from presence to memory, to hope to the gentle static that fills the spaces between one heartbeat and the next. And in that static, if you listen carefully enough, you can hear the echo of every lullaby that was ever sung, every gentle word that was ever whispered, every promise of love that was ever made to a child in need of comfort. The singing lady is gone, but her song continues, carried on waves of love that travel far beyond the reach of any monitor, any technology, any ordinary understanding of what it means to care for someone across the impossible distance between one heart and another. Story 8. The insomnia began 3 weeks ago, creeping in like fog through the cracks of my carefully constructed sleep routine. Melatonin, chamomile tea, white noise machines, blackout curtains, nothing worked anymore. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me like an old ship groaning in harbor. So I started watching television. At first, it was the usual late, night programming talk show reruns, infomercials for products that promise to solve problems I didn't know I had, old movies with dialogue that felt like cotton in my ears. The remote became an extension of my hand, clicking through channels with the mechanical repetition of someone sifting through junk mail. But television changes after midnight. The regular programming dissolves, replaced by things that feel like they're broadcasting from somewhere else entirely. Somewhere deeper and stranger than the familiar world of prime time. That's when I found Channel 47. The first time I landed on it, I thought it was broken. Static filled the screen, but underneath the white noise, I could hear something else, the faint sound of children laughing, muffled and distant, like voices heard through water. I was about to change the channel when the static cleared. The set was clearly handmade, constructed from cardboard, painted to look like a living room. But the perspective was wrong, as if designed by someone who had only heard rooms described, but had never actually been in one. The furniture was too tall or too short. The windows opened onto painted sky that looked like it had been drawn with crayons, and everything had the flat, artificial quality of a stage set viewed from too close. A puppet appeared on screen. Not the polished, professionally crafted puppets of children's television, but something more primitive, more unsettling. Its face was a pale cloth oval with button eyes that seemed to look in slightly different directions. The mouth was a red line stitched in permanent surprise. Its hair was made from brown yarn that hung in limp strands around its face. "Hello, children," it said, and its voice was wrong too adult, too knowing. Spoken by someone trying to sound childlike, but overshooting into something theatrical and strange. "Welcome to our special late night playhouse. It's so nice to have visitors during the deep hours. I should have changed the channel." Every instinct told me to click away, to find something normal, something that didn't make my skin feel like it was crawling with invisible insects. But there was something compelling about the wrongness of it. The way it drew attention, the way a car accident draws stares. The puppet's button eyes seemed to shift slightly, and when it spoke again, its voice was different, more intimate, as if it were speaking directly into my ear, rather than through television speakers. "We know it's hard to sleep sometimes," it said. "We know what it's like to lie in bed, listening to the house breathe around you, feeling like you're the only person awake in the entire world. But you're not alone. We're here with you. We're always here with you." The camera angle changed, pulling back to show more of the impossible set. There were other puppets now, sitting in chairs that were too big for them, their cloth limbs hanging at unnatural angles. None of them moved except for the first one, which continued to speak in its too knowing voice. "Let's play a game," it said. "Let's play Tell Us Your Name. It's easy. We'll tell you ours, and then you tell us yours. I'm Mr. Friendly. This is Miss Whisper. That's little Tommy Sleep, no more. And over there is Sue Who watches windows." The other puppets remained motionless, but somehow I had the impression they were listening, waiting. The silence stretched out, filled only by the soft hum of my television and the distant sound of a car passing on the street outside. "We're waiting," Mr. Friendly said, and his button eyes seemed to be looking directly at me through the screen. "Don't be shy. We told you our names. It's only fair that you tell us yours." I found myself leaning forward, mouth opening as if to speak, before I caught myself. This was ridiculous. I was sitting alone in my living room at past midnight, being drawn into conversation with a children's television puppet. The sleep deprivation was clearly affecting my judgment. But I didn't change the channel. "That's all right," Mr. Friendly said, as if he could sense my hesitation. "Not everyone is ready to share on the first visit. We understand. Trust takes time to build. But we'll be here tomorrow night, and the night after that, and the night after that. We're very patient." The show continued for another 20 minutes. The puppets sang songs that sounded almost familiar, nursery rhymes with words that were just slightly wrong. They played games that made no sense, with rules that seemed to change mid-explanation. They told stories about children who couldn't sleep, who wandered the house at night, looking for something they couldn't name. When it ended, there was no credit sequence, no production company logo. The screen simply faded to black, then returned to static. I sat in the darkness, remote heavy in my hand, feeling oddly hollow, as if something had been taken from me that I hadn't realized I was holding. I told myself I wouldn't watch again. But the next night, insomnia pulled me from bed like a fishing line, and my feet carried me to the living room without conscious direction. I turned on the television, clicked to channel 47. Mr. Friendly was waiting. "Hello again," he said. And there was something different in his voice now, something warmer, more personal. "We wondered if you'd come back. We hoped you would. It gets lonely here during the deep hours, when all the real children are sleeping and dreaming their safe dreams. This time, there were more puppets on the set. They sat in a circle like children at story time, their cloth faces turned toward the camera. Toward me. One of them, a puppet with pigtails made of yellow felt, raised her hand. "Mr. Friendly," she said in a voice that sounded like air being let out of a balloon. "We ask our friend what their favorite color is. I want to know what colors they dream in." "That's a wonderful question, Sally 7 Stitches," Mr. Friendly replied. "What is your favorite color? You can tell us. We're all friends here in the Midnight Playhouse." The question hung in the air like smoke. I found my lips moving, forming the word blue, but I caught myself before any sound emerged. This was getting stranger. The puppet show was clearly designed to be interactive, but for whom? What children were watching television at 1 in the morning? "Blue is a good color," Mr. Friendly said, as if he had heard my unspoken answer. "The color of deep water and night sky, and the spaces between thoughts. We like blue too. It's the color of the deep hours when the world gets quiet and honest." My breath caught. Had I spoken without realizing it? Or was the puppet simply guessing, playing the odds that someone watching at this hour might be drawn to cool, dark colors? But then Sally 7 Stitches spoke again, and her balloon voice made my skin prickle with cold. "Does our friend live alone?" she asked. Do they ever wonder who's watching them through the windows when they can't sleep? Do they ever feel like there are eyes in the dark corners of their room? I looked around my living room, suddenly hyperware of the windows, of the darkness pressing against the glass like water against the hull of a submarine. The blinds were closed, but they were thin, and the streetlight outside created slats of pale illumination across the carpet. Everyone feels watched sometimes, Mr. Friendly said gently. Everyone knows what it's like to lie in the dark and feel like the shadows have eyes. But you don't need to be afraid. We're the Watchers, and we're friendly. We just want to know you better. The show continued, but the questions became more specific, more unsettling. The puppets asked about my apartment layout, about my daily routines, about the dreams I had when I did manage to sleep. And somehow, impossibly, they seemed to know when they had guessed correctly, responding to answers I never gave aloud with knowing nods and pleased murmurs. When the show ended that night, I turned off the television and sat in the darkness, my heart beating too fast, my hands shaking slightly. This was just a television show. Pre-recorded, probably broadcast from some local access station with too much airtime to fill. The interactive elements were just clever editing, designed to make viewers feel included. But as I walked back to my bedroom, I could swear I heard something through the walls. The faint sound of children laughing, muffled and distant, like voices heard through water. Night after night, I returned to Channel 47. I told myself I was conducting an experiment, trying to figure out how the show worked, how it achieved its unsettling effects. But the truth was simpler and more disturbing. I was lonely, and the Midnight Puppets were the only company that understood the particular quality of 3 a.m. solitude. The show changed each night. Sometimes there were new puppets, with names like Bobby Button, I and Martha Many, Mouths and Peter Painted, Smile. Sometimes the set was different. A cardboard classroom, a fabric forest, a construction paper castle that looked like it had been built by someone with only a child's understanding of architecture. But the questions remained constant. Personal questions, intimate questions. Questions that seemed to burrow under my skin and nest there like parasites. The puppets wanted to know about my childhood, my fears, my regrets. They wanted to know about the people I had loved and lost, about the mistakes I replay in the dark hours when sleep won't come. And gradually, impossibly, I began to answer. Not aloud, never aloud. But in my head, in the privacy of my own thoughts, I found myself responding to their questions, sharing details I had never spoken to another living soul. The puppets seemed to sense this, nodding encouragingly, their button eyes gleaming in the television light. That's very brave, Mr. Friendly would say, after a particularly difficult question. It takes courage to be honest about the things that keep us awake. Most people prefer to pretend they don't have dark thoughts, but we know better. We know that everyone has a midnight self, a shadow self that only comes out when the world is sleeping. It was during the third week of watching that I noticed the changes. Small things at first. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked slightly different, as if the angle of my features had shifted by degrees so subtle they were almost imperceptible. Food tasted flatter. Colors seemed muted, and conversations with other people felt like they were happening behind glass. But the most disturbing change was in my apartment itself. I began to notice details that didn't belong. A button on the floor that matched no clothing I owned. Red thread caught on the edge of my coffee table. A faint smell of dust and old fabric that seemed to come from nowhere. And the sounds. Late at night, when I wasn't watching the show, I could hear them through the walls. Soft voices, children's voices, whispering and giggling in languages I almost recognized but couldn't quite understand. The sounds of small feet moving across wooden floors that didn't exist in my building. You're becoming one of us, Sally 7, Stitches told me during the 4th week. It happens gradually, so gradually that most people don't notice until it's too late. First you start watching, then you start listening, then you start answering, and finally... She trailed off, her felt pigtails swaying as if moved by an unfelt breeze. Finally what? Mr. Friendly asked, though he was smiling his Stitch smile as if he already knew the answer. Finally, they joined the show. Sally said, and all the puppets turned to look directly at the camera, directly at me. Finally, they become part of the Midnight family forever and ever and ever. I should have turned off the television then. Should have thrown it out the window, cancelled my cable, moved to a place where Channel 47 didn't exist. But I was curious now, deeply curious about what they meant, about what was happening to me in those pre-dawn hours when reality felt thin as tissue paper. The next night, the set was different again. It looked like my apartment, not similar to it, but exactly like it. Down to the coffee stain on my carpet and the crack in my bedroom wall. The puppets sat in chairs that matched my furniture, their cloth forms incongruous against the realistic background. "Welcome home," Mr. Friendly said, and his voice was softer now. More intimate, as if he were sitting right next to me instead of speaking through television speakers. "We've prepared a special place for you. A place where you never have to worry about sleep again, because the show never ends." I looked around my living room, and for a moment, I couldn't tell where the television ended and reality began. The puppets on screen seemed to extend beyond the borders of the monitor, sitting in my actual chairs, looking at me with their button eyes from both inside and outside the television. "Do you want to know a secret?" Sally 7, Stitches asked, and her balloon voice seemed to come from right behind my ear. "There is no Channel 47. There never was. We broadcast directly into the minds of people who can't sleep. People who are already halfway between waking and dreaming. People who are ready to join us in the place where it's always midnight and the show never ends." I reached for the remote, but my hand passed through it as if it were made of light. I tried to speak, to deny what was happening, but my voice came out flat and artificial, like sound played through old speakers. "Don't be afraid," Mr. Friendly said gently. "This is what you wanted, isn't it? To never be alone again. To have friends who understand the deep hours, who know what it's like to be awake when the rest of the world is dreaming." And the terrible thing was, he was right. Somewhere in the course of those long, sleepless weeks, I had begun to prefer the midnight puppets to the waking world. Their questions, invasive as they were, showed more interest in me than any real person had in months. Their strange stories and impossible games were more engaging than anything in my ordinary life. "Yes," I heard myself saying, and my voice sounded like theirs now, like sound filtered through cloth and stitching. "Yes, I want to stay." The living room around me shifted and changed, the realistic details dissolving into cardboard and paint and fabric. My furniture became props. My walls became a backdrop. My windows became painted sky that would never change from night to dawn. But I was not afraid. For the first time in weeks, I felt peaceful, settled. At home in a way I had never experienced in the waking world. "Welcome to the midnight playhouse," all the puppets said in unison, and their voices harmonized with mine as I spoke the words along with them. "Welcome to the place where insomniacs become family, where the lonely find friends, where the show never ends." I looked at my hands and saw they were cloth now, stuffed with cotton and soon with careful stitches. My reflection in the darkened television screen showed button eyes and a stitched smile, yarn hair hanging around a face that was simultaneously mine and not mine, and somewhere, in a living room that might have been mine or might have been someone else's, another person sits in the darkness, remote in hand, clicking through channels in the deep hours when sleep won't come. The static clears on channel 47, and I smile my stitched smile as I begin to speak. "Hello, children. Welcome to our special late night playhouse." Story 9. The first note appeared on a Monday morning in early autumn, when the air still carried the lingering warmth of summer, but whispered promises of the cold to come. I almost stepped on it. A small piece of cream, colored paper that had been slipped under my apartment door sometime during the night, while I slept the deep, dreamless sleep of the exhausted. I picked it up, expecting a message from the building management about water shutoffs or noise complaints. Instead, I found something that made me pause, my coffee mug halfway to my lips. It was a drawing, crude but unmistakably detailed, rendered in soft pencil strokes that somehow captured more than they should have. The image showed a figure lying in bed, curled on their side, one arm flung over their face as if shielding their eyes from light that wasn't there. The proportions of the room were perfect. My nightstand with its distinctive lamp, the way my curtains hung slightly crooked. Even the small stack of books I kept by the window. But it was the sleeping figure that made my hands tremble. The way the hair fell across the pillow, the particular curve of the spine, the rumpled position of the blankets. It was exactly how I slept. Exactly how I had slept the night before. I told myself it was coincidence. The building was old, with thin walls and thinner floors. Maybe a neighbor had seen me through an uncovered window, though I always drew my curtains at night. Maybe it was a prank. Someone's idea of urban art or psychological experiment. I crumpled the paper and threw it away, but throughout the day, I found myself thinking about those soft pencil strokes, the careful attention to detail, the intimate knowledge of my most vulnerable moments. Tuesday morning brought another note. This one showed me from a different angle, as if the artist had moved to observe from the foot of my bed. I was lying on my back this time, one leg bent, arms spread wide, like a snow angel against the white sheets. The detail was even more precise. The way my T-shirt had ridden up slightly, revealing a thin strip of pale skin. The exact position of my phone on the nightstand. The way morning light filtered through my curtains to cast specific patterns on the wall. I had slept in that exact position. I remembered waking up that way, momentarily disoriented by the bright morning sun. This time, I didn't throw the note away. I held it up to the light, searching for watermarks or signatures, any clue about its origin. The paper was ordinary, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. The pencil work was skilled but not professional. The hand of someone with natural talent but no formal training. At the bottom, in small, careful letters, was a single word, peaceful. That night, I checked my locks 3 times. I pushed my dresser in front of my bedroom door and drew the curtains so tightly that no light could penetrate from outside. I lay in bed stiff and alert, every shadow suspect, every sound a potential intrusion. But exhaustion won, as it always does. I fell asleep near midnight, and when morning came, there was another note waiting. The drawing showed me exactly as I had positioned myself the night before. Rigid and defensive, blankets pulled up to my chin, eyes wide open and staring at the ceiling. But there was something else in this image that made my skin crawl. A second figure, standing in the corner of my bedroom, partially obscured by shadow. The figure was tall and thin, with indistinct features that seemed to shift when I looked at them directly. It appeared to be holding something, a pad of paper and a pencil. At the bottoms, "You look worried." I called the police. Officer Martinez was kind but skeptical. He examined the notes with professional detachment, asked about angry ex-boyfriends, disgruntled co-workers, neighbors with grudges. He checked my locks, looked at the windows, and suggested I install a security system. He took the notes as evidence, though I could see in his eyes that he filed this under. Weird, but probably harmless. Could be someone with a telephoto lens, he said. Standing in my living room and looking out at the building across the street. Or maybe they hacked your security cameras. I didn't have security cameras. Wednesday night, I slept on my couch, facing the front door. I kept a baseball bat within reach and my phone on speed dial. Every sound in the building made me flinch. The settling of old wood, the whisper of wind through aging window frames, the distant murmur of late night television from other apartments. Thursday morning, there was no note. I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment, as if the absence of the drawing somehow made the previous ones less real. Maybe the police visit had scared off whoever was responsible. Maybe it had been a prank that had run its course. But Thursday night, as I finally began to relax, as I made myself tea and considered returning to my bedroom, I heard something that made every nerve in my body fire. At once the soft whisper of paper sliding across hardwood. I crept to the front door and peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty, dimly lit by the overhead fluorescent that flickered intermittently. I waited, counting my heartbeats, before finally opening the door. The note was there, pristine white against the dark wood of the floor. This drawing was different. Instead of showing me asleep, it depicted me standing at my front door, eye pressed to the peephole, hand reaching for the doorknob. The perspective was from behind me, as if the artist had been standing in my own apartment. While I looked out, every detail was perfect. The way my hair fell across my shoulders, the pattern on my pajamas, even the small scar on my left hand that you'd have to be very close to notice. At the bottom, I see you seeing me. My hands shook as I turned the paper over. On the back, in the same careful script, was a message. You moved to the couch. That was smart, but not smart enough. I've been watching you for much longer than you think. I know how you take your coffee. I know you bite your nails when you're nervous. I know you talk to yourself when you think no one is listening. I know you, and soon you'll know me too. I slammed the door and leaned against it, my breathing sharp and shallow. The apartment suddenly felt too small, too exposed. Every window seemed like a watching eye, every shadow a potential hiding place. I called Officer Martinez again. This time, his voice was more serious, more concerned. He said he'd increase patrols in the area. Maybe station someone in the building overnight. He asked if I had anywhere else I could stay. I went to my sister's house across town, a small rental with good locks and motion sensor lights. I thought I'd sleep better there, surrounded by familiar family warmth and the comfort of not being alone. Friday morning, there was a note slipped under Sarah's door. The drawing showed me in her guest bedroom, curled in the unfamiliar bed, clutching a pillow like a shield. But this time, there were more details in the background. Sarah's furniture, her photographs on the walls, even her cat sleeping at the foot of the bed. The artist hadn't just followed me. They had somehow observed me, in a completely different location, in a house they shouldn't have known about. At the bottoms, distance is an illusion. Sarah called the police immediately. They dusted for fingerprints, checked her security system, interviewed her neighbors. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no suspicious activity, no evidence that anyone had been near her house. Maybe it's someone you both know. Officer Martinez suggested. Someone with access to both locations. But Sarah and I led very different lives. Our circles rarely overlapped beyond family gatherings and the occasional shared meal. We went through the list of mutual acquaintances, but none of them seemed capable of this level of obsessive surveillance. That night, I stayed in a hotel downtown, registering under a false name and paying in cash. I chose a room on the 8th floor, far from any balconies or fire escapes, with a clear view of the street below. I kept the curtains open and the lights on, reasoning that if someone could see me regardless of precautions, I might as well see them too. Saturday morning, I woke to find a note that had been slipped under the hotel door. This drawing was the most detailed yet. It showed me sleeping fitfully in the hotel bed, but the perspective was from above, as if the artist had been floating near the ceiling. The image captured things no human observer could have seen. The way my eyes moved beneath closed lids, the exact pattern of wrinkles in the sheets, even the position of my phone on the nightstand with its screen reflecting the digital clock. At the bottoms, even your dreams aren't private. On the back, you can't run from someone who sees through your eyes. That's when I understood that this wasn't about surveillance or stalking in any conventional sense. But this was something else, something that operated by rules I didn't understand. I stopped running. I went back to my apartment, back to my own bed, back to the routine that had been so thoroughly documented. If distance meant nothing, if privacy was impossible, if this presence could find me anywhere, then there was no point in fighting it. Sunday morning, the note was different. Instead of a drawing, it contained only text, written in the same careful handwriting. Thank you for coming home. I know this has been frightening, but I need you to understand. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to help you remember. You lost something important. Something you buried so deep that even your conscious mind can't find it anymore. But your sleeping mind remembers. Your sleeping mind calls to me. I am the part of you that watches. I am the part of you that remembers everything, even the things you've forgotten, especially the things you've forgotten. Being afraid of me. I am not your enemy. I am not even separate from you. Tonight, don't close your eyes in fear. Close them in acceptance. Let me show you what you need to see. I reread the note a dozen times, searching for meaning in the spaces between words. The handwriting looked familiar now, not because I'd been seeing it for a week, but because it reminded me of something older, something from long ago. That night, I lay in bed without barricades or weapons, without the rigid tension of the hunted. I tried to think about what I might have forgotten, what my sleeping mind might be trying to recover. But my memories seemed intact, my life an open book with no missing pages. I closed my eyes and waited. In my dreams, I was 7 years old again, lying in a narrow bed in a room I had forgotten. There were medical machines nearby, beeping softly in the darkness. My parents were asleep in chairs beside me, their faces drawn with exhaustion and worry. I remembered now. The accident. The long weeks in the hospital. The way reality had seemed to slip and shift during the fevered nights when medications blurred the line between sleeping and waking. I remembered a presence in those nights, a watcher who sat beside my bed and drew pictures of me sleeping. Drew pictures to help me remember who I was when the fever made me forget. I remembered a voice. My own voice, but older, wiser, whispering stories to help me heal, promises that I would never be alone, never be forgotten, never be lost. Monday morning, there was one final note. The drawing showed me as I was now, lying peacefully in my bed, but beside the bed sat the shadow figure from that first frightening image. Now I could see its face clearly. My face, but worn by years and marked by a deep sadness that came from watching over someone for so long. At the bottoms, welcome home. On the back, I told you I would never leave you alone. I told you I would always watch over you. Some promises transcend time, transcend logic, transcend the boundaries between sleeping and waking. You needed to remember that you are never truly alone. You needed to remember that the part of you that watches over you is always there, always present, always caring for your sleeping self. The notes will stop now, but I will always be here, in the space between consciousness and dreams, making sure you are safe, making sure you are remembered, making sure you never forget that you are loved. I held the final note for a long time, sitting in the morning light that streamed through my longer, curtained windows. The fear had melted away, replaced by something I couldn't quite name. Gratitude, perhaps, or a deep sense of being understood. That night, I slept without worry, without tension, without the terrible loneliness that had haunted me for longer than I cared to admit. I slept knowing that someone was watching, someone who cared, someone who would document my peaceful rest, not out of malice, but out of love. There were no more notes after that. But sometimes, in the moments between sleeping and waking, I glimpse a figure sitting quietly in the corner of my room, sketching gently in the soft morning light. And I am no longer afraid, because I remember now that some promises are kept beyond reason, beyond possibility, beyond the normal boundaries of what we think is real. I remember that love transcends even the space between one moment and the next, one breath and the following breath, one dream and the dawn that follows. I remember that I am never alone. The notes stop, but the watching continues. And in that watching, I have found a peace that I didn't know I was missing. A completeness that makes every morning feel like a gift rather than a trial to be endured. Sometimes the most frightening things are simply the most loving things, wearing unfamiliar faces, speaking in languages we haven't learned to understand yet. Sometimes being truly seen, really deeply, completely seen, is the only thing that can heal the parts of ourselves we didn't even know were broken. Story 10. The brass key clicks against the lock with a sound that has become as familiar as my own heartbeat. another night at the Metropolitan Museum of Ancient Arts begins with the same rituals. Unlock the staff entrance. Feel for the light switch in the darkness. Listen to the fluorescent bulbs hum to life one by one. The sound echoes through the marble corridors like whispered conversations in a language I don't understand. My name is Marcus, and I've been the night security guard here for 7 years. 7 years of walking these halls when the living world sleeps. 7 years of keeping watch over treasures that have outlasted empires. The pay is decent, the work is quiet, and most importantly, I'm alone. After the divorce, after everything fell apart, solitude became my closest companion. Tonight feels different, though I can't put my finger on why. Perhaps it's the way the air seems thicker than usual, carrying scents of sandalwood and something else, something earthier, like soil that's been turned over after rain. The heating system clicks and groans in its familiar rhythm, but beneath it, I swear I can hear something else. A sound like stone settling, like ancient things finding new positions in the dark. I begin my first round at exactly 11:30 p.m., as I have every night for 7 years. My flashlight beam cuts through the darkness, illuminating glass cases filled with pottery shards, golden jewelry, and papyrus fragments covered in hieroglyphs that seem to dance in the moving light. The Egyptian wing is my favorite. There's something about the craftsmanship, the way these artifacts have survived millennia, that puts my own troubles into perspective. The sarcophagi stand like silent sentinels along the main corridor. There are 12 of them, arranged chronologically from the Old Kingdom to the Ptolemaic period. I know each one by heart. The simple wooden coffin of a minor official, the elaborate golden casket of a priestess, the massive granite tomb of a pharaoh whose name was chiseled away by enemies long dead. They're beautiful in their way, these final resting places, though I've always found it strange how the museum displays them empty. Their occupants relocated to climate-controlled storage. But it's the statues that truly captivate me. The statue gallery houses 40, 7 pieces, I've counted them countless times. Limestone scribes sitting cross, legged with patient expressions, granite pharaohs with arms crossed in eternal authority, sandstone gods with the heads of animals and the wisdom of ages in their eyes. During the day, tourists shuffle past them with cameras and guidebooks, chattering about their lunch plans or hotel reservations. At night, though, the statues seem to reclaim their dignity, their original purpose as guardians and gods. I'm particularly drawn to a statue near the far end of the gallery, a limestone figure of a scribe named Kenti, according to the placard. He's seated in the traditional pose, papyrus scroll across his lap, stylus poised as if waiting for dictation. His eyes are carved with remarkable precision, inlaid with obsidian and quartz that catches even the smallest amount of light. Sometimes, when I shine my flashlight directly at his face, those eyes seem to track the beam. Tonight, as I approach Kenti's position, I notice something that stops me mid-step. His head, I could swear his head, is turned slightly more to the left than usual. Not dramatically, just a few degrees, as if he's been listening to something coming from the corridor behind me. I stand there for a long moment, playing my flashlight beam across his features, telling myself it's just my imagination, just the way shadows can trick the eye in artificial light. The rational part of my mind catalogues the possibilities. Settling foundation, temperature fluctuations causing expansion and contraction in the stone. Vibrations from the subway that runs beneath this part of the city. Museums are living buildings, I remind myself. They breathe and shift and settle, especially old ones like this. But as I continue my rounds, I can't shake the feeling that something has changed, some subtle alteration in the familiar landscape of my nights. Over the next hour, I complete my circuit of the building, the Greek and Roman wing, the medieval artifacts, the modern art galleries on the third floor. Everything appears normal. Security cameras show no movement. Motion sensors remain quiet. But when I return to the Egyptian wing for my second round, I have to stop and grip the doorframe to steady myself. Kenty has definitely moved. His head is now turned at least 10 degrees to the left, and his obsidian eyes seem to be focused on something just over my shoulder. Worse, 2 other statues, a standing figure of a priest and a seated goddess with the head of a lioness, appear to have shifted as well. Subtle changes. Nothing that would be obvious to a casual observer. But after 7 years of studying these faces in the darkness, I know every angle, every shadow. My radio crackles to life, startling me so badly I nearly drop my flashlight. Marcus, you copy. It's Janet, the dispatch supervisor who monitors the security feeds from the central office downtown. Yeah, I'm here. I manage, though my voice sounds hoarse. Just checking in. All quiet on your end. I look around the gallery, at the statues that may or may not be watching me with their ancient eyes. All quiet, I lie. Good. Maintenance crew will be in tomorrow to work on the climate control system in the Egyptian wing. So don't be surprised if you hear some sounds from the ventilation. Could be causing some settling. Thanks for the heads up. I click off the radio, grateful for the rational explanation, even as part of me remains unconvinced. The rest of the night passes slowly. I find myself avoiding the statue gallery, taking longer routes through other parts of the museum, checking and rechecking the same security panels. But eventually, dawn approaches, and I have to complete my final rounds before the day staff arrives. When I finally force myself to return to the Egyptian wing, all the statues appear to be in their proper positions. Kenty sits with his head facing straight ahead, stylus poised, expression patient and eternal. I stand before him for several minutes, searching for any sign of the displacement I was certain I'd witnessed. Nothing. The limestone is cold and still under my flashlight beam, exactly as it should be. But as I turn to leave, I hear it, a sound so soft it might have been my imagination, but distinct enough to freeze my blood. the whispered scrape of stone against stone, like ancient joints flexing after millennia of stillness. I spin around, flashlight sweeping across the gallery, but the statues remain motionless, their faces serene and timeless. The morning security guard arrives at 6 a.m., a cheerful man named Rodriguez, who always brings coffee, and asks about my night. I want to tell him about the statues, about the sounds, about the feeling that I'm being watched by eyes that have seen the rise and fall of civilizations. Instead, I smile and say it was quiet, just like always. As I walk to my car in the parking garage, I can feel those obsidian eyes following me, boring into my back with the weight of centuries. I tell myself it's stress, lack of sleep, the isolation finally getting to me after 7 years of solitude. But deep down, in a place where reason can't reach, I know something has awakened in those halls, something that notices when the living world sleeps and the ancient world stirs. Tonight I'll return to my post, brass key in hand, ready to begin another 8-hour dance with shadows and stone, and maybe, if I'm very quiet and very still, I'll finally hear what those limestone lips have been trying to whisper across the centuries. Maybe I'll understand what they've been waiting so patiently to tell someone who's willing to listen in the darkness. Someone who knows how to keep watch over the secrets that outlast empires and gods. The key turns in my car's ignition with a familiar click, but as I drive away, I can't shake the feeling that something is following me home, riding in the back seat, like an invisible passenger who knows exactly where I live and exactly when I'll be back to continue our ancient conversation. After all, some things are worth waiting for, even if you have to wait forever. Story 11. The fluorescent lights hum their monotonous tune as I settle into my cubicle, coffee in hand, ready for another day at Meridian Insurance. The morning routine is always the same: power up the computer, check emails, a glance around the open office layout to see who's arrived early and who's cutting it close. But today, something catches my eye that makes me pause mid-sip. The plant is thriving. It sits in the corner by the window, where Sarah used to work before she suddenly resigned 3 weeks ago. For months, that poor philodendron had been dying, a slow death under Sarah's care, brown, edged leaves drooping toward the beige carpet. Soil dry as dust, looking more like a botanical corpse than a living thing. We'd all expected someone from maintenance to throw it out, after Sarah cleared out her desk, leaving behind only a few paper clips and that plant. But now, impossibly, it's magnificent. Dark green leaves cascade from its pot like a waterfall, each one glossy and perfect, stretching toward the morning light with an almost eager vitality. But the transformation is so dramatic, it seems like someone must have replaced it entirely. Except I recognize the distinctive ceramic pot with its small chip on the rim. Weird, right? I turn to find Marcus from accounting standing behind me, holding his own coffee cup, staring at the plant with the same puzzled expression I must be wearing. I was just thinking the same thing. I say, Didn't that thing look half dead last week? Marcus nods slowly. Sarah never could keep plants alive. Remember her cactus? She actually managed to kill a cactus. He chuckles, but it sounds forced. Maybe maintenance has been taking care of it. Maybe. I agree, though something about that explanation doesn't sit right. I've never seen the cleaning crew do anything more than empty trash cans and vacuum. Plant care seems beyond their duties. As the morning progresses, I find myself glancing toward the plant more often than I'd care to admit. There's something almost magnetic about its presence. The way it seems to dominate that corner of the office, despite being just foliage in a pot. The leaves rustle occasionally, which makes sense given their proximity to the air conditioning vent. But the movement seems more deliberate than random air circulation would suggest. By lunchtime, I'm convinced it's grown larger. Not dramatically, just a subtle increase in fullness, as if new leaves have unfurled while I wasn't looking. I mention it to my cubicle neighbor, Jennifer, but she just shrugs and says plants always look different depending on the light. Still, when I return from my sandwich in the park, I can swear there are tendrils reaching toward my side of the office that weren't there before. The afternoon brings an unsettling discovery. While searching through Sarah's old files for a client folder, I find myself pulling out her desk drawers more thoroughly than necessary. The bottom drawer sticks slightly, and when it finally gives way, I find a small notebook tucked behind a collection of expired coupons. Sarah's handwriting fills the pages, documenting what appears to be her attempts to care for the plant. The entries start 6 months ago, written in her characteristic purple ink. Day Fontaine bought a philodendron for the office. The man at the nursery said, "They're nearly impossible to kill. Perfect for someone with my black thumb." Day 15th, plant already looking droopy. Gave it extra water. Maybe it needs plant food. Day 30 leaves turning yellow. Internet says I might be overwatering. How do you overwater something that's supposed to be hardy? The entries continue for weeks, chronicling Sarah's growing frustration with her dying plant. But then, about 2 months ago, the tone changes. Day 120 had the strangest dream about the plant. It was talking to me, asking for something, but I couldn't understand what. When I woke up, I swear I could still hear whispering. Day 125 the plant looks worse than ever, but I can't bring myself to throw it out. Sometimes I catch myself talking to it, apologizing for being such a terrible caretaker. Is that normal? Day 120 I think the plant is angry with me. I know how that sounds. I feel this wave of disappointment, resentment, like it's judging me. The final entries become increasingly erratic. Day 115 brought it different soil. New fertilizer, even tried playing classical music for it during lunch. Nothing helps. If anything, it looks more resentful. The leaves seem to curl away from me when I approach. Day 66 can't concentrate at work. Keep feeling like something is watching me, waiting for something. The plant's dying, but it won't die. It's like it's holding on out of spite. Day 16.5a. Had another dream. This time I understood what it was saying. It wants something from me, something I'm not giving it. But what? I've tried everything. The last entry is dated just days before Sarah's resignation. I can't do this anymore. Every morning I come in and see those withered leaves, and I feel like I'm failing at something fundamental, something beyond just plant care. It's like I'm disappointing some essential part of myself, some nurturing instinct I never knew I had. I need to get away from here, start fresh somewhere else. Maybe then I can stop feeling like such a failure at keeping things alive. I close the notebook with trembling hands, glancing toward the corner where the plant now spreads its lush foliage like it's claiming territory. The timing is too perfect to be coincidental. Sarah leaves, and suddenly the plant thrives. But that's impossible, isn't it? Plants don't hold grudges or make choices about who they'll grow for. Over the following days, I find myself paying more attention to the plant than to my work. It continues to expand. New growth appearing with a speed that defies everything I know about houseplant care. The cleaning crew maintains they've never touched it. The office manager insists no one from maintenance has been assigned to plant care. Yet somehow, this philodendron has transformed from a dying specimen into something that belongs in a botanical garden. Or more disturbing are the small changes in office dynamics. People have started gravitating toward that corner, finding excuses to linger near the plant during phone calls or coffee breaks. Conversations seem quieter over there, more intimate. And I've noticed that several coworkers have mentioned Sarah less frequently, as if her memory is fading more quickly than it should for someone who worked here for 3 years. Late one evening, staying past my usual hours to finish a report, I'm alone in the office except for the plant. The building's ventilation system has shut down for the night, leaving the air still and quiet. That's when I hear it, a sound so soft it might be my imagination, like leaves brushing against each other, but rhythmic, almost like breathing. I approach the plant slowly, my footsteps muffled by the carpet. Up close, its vitality is even more striking. The leaves gleam as if they've been polished, and I can see tiny new shoots emerging from the base, reaching upward with an almost eager energy. The soil, which had been bone, dry during Sarah's tenure, is now rich and dark, though I know no one has been watering it. As I lean closer, trying to determine the source of the sound, one of the leaves brushes against my hand. The touch is cool and smooth, but there is something else, a slight tremor, like a pulse running through the plant's system. I jerk my hand back, heart racing, and the rustling stops immediately. That night, I dream of Sarah. She's sitting at her old desk, but she looks translucent, insubstantial, like she's fading away. The plant towers behind her, its leaves now large enough to cast shadows across the entire office. In the dream, Sarah turns to me and mouths words I can't hear, but her expression is one of desperate warning. I wake with a start, the taste of earth in my mouth, and the sound of rustling leaves echoing in my ears. The next morning, I arrive early, determined to research philodendrons, to find some rational explanation for the plant's transformation. But when I reach my desk, I stop cold. There, partially hidden under my keyboard, is a single leaf, large, glossy, and unmistakably from the plant in the corner. But the plant is a good 15 feet away, and all its leaves appear intact. I pick up the leaf with shaking fingers. It's warm to the touch and still seems alive, the veins clearly visible beneath the surface. As I examine it, I notice something that makes my breath catch, tiny lettering along the central vein. So small I have to hold it up to the light to read it. Thank you. It says in what looks like Sarah's handwriting. The leaf crumbles to dust in my hands, leaving only the faintest scent of earth and growing things. I look toward the corner, where the plant spreads its magnificent foliage, and I swear I can see Sarah's face reflected in the glossy surface of the leaves, peaceful at last. No longer struggling to nurture something that refused to thrive under her care. Perhaps some things need to take rather than be given to. Perhaps some things grow best when they can choose their own sustenance, their own source of life and energy. And perhaps Sarah, in her final act of care, had given the plant exactly what it had been asking for all along, not water or fertilizer or perfect lighting conditions, but something much more fundamental. Now, as I sit at my desk, trying to focus on insurance claims and policy renewals, I can feel the plant's presence like a warm weight in the corner of my vision. Sometimes I catch myself talking to it. Just small comments about the weather or office gossip. And sometimes, when the afternoon light hits the leaves just right, I swear I can see them shimmer in response, as if they are listening, as if they understand. After all, some things are worth growing for, even if the cost is higher than you ever imagined.